What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto accidentally shared a bed with witch during training trip in jungle? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. It was October 10th and the village of Konoha, located on a hidden continent from the rest of the world, was currently facing a terror unlike what they could possibly comprehend. What was meant to be a happy occasion had turned into pure horror. Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze had become pregnant again, but this time was expecting twin girls. 3 years ago on this same date, she had successfully given birth to a baby boy that had, for all intents and purposes, looked like a clone of his father, the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze. They had named him Naruto Uzumaki, choosing to give him the Uzumaki family name since they figured his personality would likely be more akin to his mother than Minato. However, a masked man had come and extracted Kyuubi, a powerful Pokegirl that was said to have belonged to the Sage of Six Paths, from Kushina and let it loose on Konoha. But Minato, after securing his daughters and wife, had other plans. Summoning the boss of the Toad Summons, Gamabunta, he asked her to stall Kyuubi long enough for him to think of something. As he stood atop the giant Pokegirl's crown, he knew he had only one option available. So, using a bit of magic he had gathered in a scroll, he summoned Zalera, the Esper of Death. She looked over to her summoner with no visible emotion. She could already tell that he had killed hundreds, if not more, in blood-stained hands. "What do you want?" she asked. Minato swallowed the lump in his throat. This was the first time he had ever summoned anyone other than Gamabunta, and the mere presence Zalera exuded made it difficult to breathe. "A madman has unleashed one of the sage's Pokegirls upon my home," he said in desperation. "I need you to seal it away within my daughters." Zalera glanced over to Kyuubi, who was busy fighting Gamabunta to pay any attention to her. The soul of the giant Pokegirl was indeed powerful, but it was too much to split between the two newborns. "Very well," she said. "But when I do, I will claim your soul as payment." Minato swallowed again, nodding. "I understand," he replied. Zalera stretched out her arm and took hold of Kyuubi by her throat before raising her up so that their eyes could meet. With a quick yank, the beast had been split in 3 parts. 1 crimson orb, 1 orange orb, and 1 blue orb. The crimson orb and the blue orb, containing the most power, were placed within the 2 girls since they were young enough that their bodies would be able to adapt to the power of Kyuubi. The orange orb, being the weakest and containing the mostly intact soul of Kyuubi, had to be placed in someone else. That was when she felt a similar soul as the one who had summoned her. He had spiky blonde hair and glowing blue eyes that radiated innocence. She thrust the soul within his sleeping body. She wished she could have devoured the soul of the powerful Pokegirl, but, to some extent, she had to comply with the wishes of her summoner. She was sure she would be summoned again one day with the chance to devour another powerful soul. She could wait. She bore a satisfied smile on her lips before looking at Minato expectantly. "Now it is time for you to fulfill your end of the bargain," she said hungrily, licking her lips in preparation. Minato looked to his 2 daughters and felt something shift inside of him. Little did he know that this moment would change the face of the world, though whether it was a good thing or not would likely be seen decades from now. "I'm sorry, but I cannot leave my children without parents," he explained sorrowfully as he prepared to unsummon her from the land of mortals. "You think you can just back out of our agreement?" she barked angrily at the cowering human. Just as she was about to end his life, she remembered something. She saw the boy who bore the exact likeness of the man who summoned her. He had Kyuubi's soul within him, though his soul was already quite powerful for a child in his infancy. His life force was stronger than any she had encountered before in her lifetime and remarkable potential for any profession he would take in the future. "Very well," she said smoothly, making Minato sigh in relief. "However, I shall take something even more precious from you in exchange." Her hand reached out and took hold of the sleeping infant, who had promptly been awakened and began to cry wildly. "Naruto!" Minato shouted, eyes wide as he watched her plunge her hand deep within his tiny body and pull out a yellow orb and swallowing it. A satisfied sigh escaped her lips, which turned sadistic as she released the baby, forcing Minato to catch him. "If you ever try to summon me again, I will end not only your life, but the lives of everyone and anyone associated with you within 500 miles of where you summoned me." With those last words, Zalera had somehow vanished from sight. After a few days, getting everything repaired and returned to normal, Tsunade Senju had been called to the Namikaze residence to check up on the three children. The girls had been given a clean bill of health, but Naruto was a different story entirely. "What's wrong with my baby boy?" Kushina sobbed, tears falling from her violet eyes. Tsunade pulled out a clipboard. "To start with, Naruto is now missing a large amount of chakra from his body," she said. Normally, he could regenerate this amount until he was full again, but that's where the news gets even worse. His chakra coils have been completely torn to shreds. Quite frankly, I'm amazed that he is even alive considering the extent of the damage and just how little chakra he has available in his body. It is entirely likely that he will never be able to become a ninja. If he does somehow make it, it will be a career of mediocrity. He will never make it beyond Genin or Chunin if he makes it that far. Minato held Kushina in his arms as she wept wildly into his shoulder. He thought that Kushina would have died after the extraction, but she had somehow been able to recover thanks to her remarkable Uzumaki longevity. If he had known she would have survived, he would have sacrificed himself to Zalera. But now, because of his decision, Naruto had been robbed of his chance to become a ninja and following in his parents' footsteps like his sisters would. "I would suggest bringing him in for another checkup when he begins to hit puberty," the medic added. "We'll do a blood test to see if he can even become a good tamer. If not, you may want to consider enrolling him in a civilian school." Minato nodded as Kushina cried even harder. It would be a difficult decision to make. For now, however, they would keep this secret between them until Naruto was old enough to handle the news. Several years later, the Uzumaki Namikaze family had been doing fairly well. Mito and Naruko, his younger twin siblings, were 4 years old. Mito took after their mother's looks, but shared her father's keen mind. Naruko had short golden hair with natural red highlights giving it a fiery appearance and blue eyes. She had a blend of her mother's attitude and her father's wild looks. Naruto had turned 7 years old, but his personality had developed strangely. He was oddly subdued. His attitude was similar to that of the Hyuga clan, though he did show some emotions from time to time. He was quiet, almost to the point that you would forget he was there if he did not bring it to your attention, though this was through no fault of his own. Growing up with Mito and Naruko, he had a rough time getting his parents to notice him. He tried to wear loud, obnoxious clothes and be rather loud and obnoxious himself, but his parents were quickly dragged away to attend to the twins or other matters involving the village. Because of this, Naruto had just sort of faded into the background. He sat in his room quietly, reading a book he had gotten from the library. Ever since he had turned 7, he had wanted to become a ninja. He tried to get his parents to help him train, but whenever they did, they would always make up some excuse or another and tell him to read a book or something. So he went into his father's library and began to read a few books about Pokegirls or training manuals meant for ninja or those trying to become ninjas. Ever since then, he had been consumed with the books he had begun to read to the point that others almost began to expect it from him. However, for him, it was an unfortunate and constant reminder. Today was supposed to be the shared birthday of all 3 Uzumaki Namikaze children. His 7th and the girl's 4th. Downstairs, many influential people were gathered to celebrate the occasion. Friends of the family and the like had all been invited. But the party wasn't for him. It was almost completely for the twins. It seemed like in their rush to get decorations set up, invitations sent out to their respective recipients, and taking care of the crying twins, he had been all but forgotten by his own family. This wasn't the first time it had happened. On the night of the Kyubi festival, his mother and father had forgotten him in the mansion while they took Mito and Naruko to celebrate. It wasn't until they came home rather late and somewhat drunk did they finally notice an upset Naruto standing behind the gate that they realized their mistake and quickly apologized. This happened more often than they would care to remember. Naruto was somewhat quiet and it was easy to forget he was even there, but it was no excuse. However, to try and make up for their neglect, they hired a bunny girl by the name of Urza to babysit him and to do the odd chore around the house. One day, the week prior, when Naruto had been accidentally left at home, he had gone to make himself a sandwich when he ran into the bunny girl trying to do the laundry. I say trying because there were soap bubbles everywhere and she looked quite distressed. Flashback. "Are you alright?" he asked quietly. She fell to her knees and began to sob uncontrollably. Lady Kushina and Lord Minato will dock my pay if they find out I ruined the laundry again, she cried. Naruto looked on at the disaster before sighing. Let me help you clean this up, Urza-chan, he said with a faint smile. The bunny girl spun around and was shocked to see Naruto standing behind her. I can't do that, Naruto-sama, she said, waving her arms around wildly. What would Lord and Lady Namikaze think if they found out I allowed their son to correct my mistake? I doubt they would think much of it, Naruto spoke, trying to hide the venom in his tone. Besides, I want to help you, and as long as you don't tell them, they won't find out. This of it like our little secret, ya know? Urza blushed and nodded, allowing the young master of the house to help her out with her problem. It was discovered that she had simply used too much soap. When he asked how much she used, she embarrassingly told him that the box had fallen into the washing machine when she had turned her back for a moment to answer a phone call from Minato, who was asking her if she could get around to cleaning the girls' rooms once she finished the laundry. Once the mess was cleaned up, Urza had realized all too late that her uniform was soaking wet and soapy. She couldn't show herself to the Namikaze family in wet, soapy clothes. So she began to cry again. Take off your uniform, Naruto said calmly. If we wash it, they won't know anything happened, right? Urza sniffled and nodded, agreeing with Naruto's point before stripping herself of every last bit of her clothes, granting the soon-to-be 7-year-old boy a perfect view of her body. She was 5'6.5" tall and had bigger S than Kushina. She had long brown hair tied into a bun and her nether regions were free of any hair. Her entire body was toned, likely because of the exercise she got by doing all of the work around the house. She was amazingly beautiful in his opinion. When they got her uniform in the washing machine after putting everything that was in the super soapy load in the dryer, Naruto took her by the hand and brought her to the bathroom. Urza had a light blush on her cheeks as she was brought into the bathroom. Why are we going to the bathroom, Naruto-sama, she asked. We're going to take a bath, he said simply. Urza's face became a brilliant scarlet. I can't do that, Naruto-sama, she stuttered. The scandal. You need to get the soap residue off of you before it becomes noticeable, he mentioned. I was planning on taking a bath after lunch anyways, so I might as well get it out of the way now. While Naruto drew the bath water, Urza had zipped out, grabbed Naruto a set of clean change of clothes and returned just as quickly, locking the door behind them. Mito had a bad habit of barging into the restroom whenever he took a bath, and it annoyed him to no end. As if there weren't plenty of bathrooms in the house to use, she somehow always found the one he was using. Naruto began to strip out of his dirty clothes without bothering to cover himself. Urza had unknowingly begun to ogle him, and her face became even more crimson than it had when he first suggested they bathe together. Naruto gathered a pair of towels and washrags for them and shut the water off when he was satisfied with how warm it was. Steam partially filled the bathroom, but did not do much to obscure their vision. Naruto stepped into the warm water and sat down, sighing in relief as the warm water worked its wonders on his body. He looked at Urza's nude form and motioned for her to join him, which she did hesitantly. She entered the water behind him, allowing the boy to rest his head on her bountiful S. He took a deep breath and relaxed against the comfortable pillows that wrapped around his shoulders. As the hot water began to ease the tension in their bodies, Urza grabbed a rag and began to lather it up with soap. Do you want me to wash your back, Naruto-sama, she asked. She felt him nod through her S before leaning forward, exposing his back to her. She began to scrub his back free of any grime and filth. She had somehow gotten soap on her S and began to press them against him as she reached over to scrub his chest. When she was done and rinsed him off, she turned around and he began to do the same for her. He scrubbed her back and even began to scrub her voluptuous S, causing her to try and suppress the sounds that wanted to come out. While not terribly sensitive, her S were just sensitive enough that by Naruto's gentle ministrations with the soapy cloth, she was becoming incredibly hot and bothered. Once this event was over, she planned on going to the poke center to get her taming cycle. Once they were both rinsed and dried off and Naruto fully dressed, they got out of the tub, drained the water, and went to the laundry room where they had pulled the clothes from the dryer. Naruto had began to fold the clothes, being careful to separate the clothes that belonged to each member of the family from the others. It would not do for Kushina to get Naruto's panties and the girls their mother's rather risque panties. Once that was done, her uniform had finished drying. She quickly put on the uniform and made sure that nothing was out of place. "Thank you for helping me, Naruto-sama," she said, tears of joy in her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Naruto smiled at her, causing her to blush. This was the first time she had seen Naruto genuinely smile since she began working for the Uzumaki Namikaze family. "It wasn't that big of an obstacle," he said modestly. "And I really had fun spending time with you, Urza-chan." "You are far too kind, Naruto-sama," she said. "Please stop that, Urza-chan," he said politely. "Call me Naruto or Naruto-kun. We are friends after all." "Thank you, Naruto-kun," she said, her blush returning full force with the familiarity she was showing him. "And happy birthday." Naruto looked slightly gobsmacked that Urza had remembered that it was just as much his birthday as it was Mito and Naruko's. He wrapped his tiny arms around the bunny girl's wide hips, his face unintentionally burying itself in her bosom. "Thank you for remembering, Urza-chan," he said, tears barely being held back by sheer willpower alone. His parents practically forgot he existed sometimes. The only person who seemed like they noticed him was Mito and, though they were closer than he seemed to be with the rest of the family, they weren't as close as they could be. Or should be. When she and Naruko were called by their parents, only Mito would spare him an apologetic glance before rushing off with her sister. End flashback. As the years went on, the rest of the Uzumaki Namikaze family began to notice that Urza was slowly becoming more akin to Naruto's personal servant than the maid to the Uzumaki Namikaze family as a whole. However, while this did somewhat upset Minato and Kushina, they allowed her to stay because she was one of the few people he interacted with who could get him to smile. So they hired another Pokegirl to act as the family's caretaker while Minato was at work being the Hokage and Kushina had gone back to doing missions as a kunoichi. However, between missions and their duties, Minato and Kushina had begun to train Mito and Naruko in how to access their chakra. When Naruto asked if he could join them, they made up some excuse like they suddenly had a mission or a meeting was about to take place and they wouldn't be able to help him. After the third time he asked, he simply gave up on it and became even more distant from his parents and siblings. He had begun to spend even more time with Urza after the event in question and started showing signs of affection to the bunny girl, which she would return enthusiastically when they were alone. However, around his 9th birthday, Minato and Kushina began to notice something strange. Naruto had begun to act even more affectionately toward Urza. Nothing too big, a kiss on the cheek when he thought nobody was looking or around. Holding her hand with their fingers intertwined. Hugs that went on for far longer than normal between passing acquaintances. So they had decided to install a miniature camera in his room. Mostly as a precaution, a little extra peace of mind. They had done the same for the girls' rooms. Just in case a visiting ninja or tamer thought they could kidnap the children of the Hokage for ransom or some other foolish notion. What they didn't expect to find was footage of Naruto and Urza having in his room. Slowly, more footage began to pile up with Naruto having with Urza in different positions. Most with the bunny girl beneath him with very few involving her on top of him. Oral, anal, doggy style, cowboy, reverse cowgirl, 69, missionary. You name it, they probably did it at least once to determine if they liked it or not. Rather than be happy for their son, they were appalled that the innocent bunny girl raped their son and took advantage of their generosity. In their mind, she was trying to get pregnant with his child in an attempt to access their wealth. Truth be told, they couldn't be further from the truth. Over the first year since their initial introduction, Naruto had volunteered to help her out with her chores, often helping her avoid getting in trouble when she would accidentally spill something on her uniform. This led the two to taking baths together where, as Naruto got older and more curious, they began to experiment with touching. The touching went further when Naruto had accidentally made Urza orgasm while washing her ass. After that, they began to kiss in secret before that got more heated and slowly evolved into a passionate relationship. Naruto had seemed to stop growing once he hit 4 feet 5 inches tall, but that didn't bother Urza. In fact, it kind of turned her on more. She taught him how to make her feel good and he quickly learned every erogenous area on her body, using them to make her climax dozens of times in the span of an hour. Because of this, the portion of her paycheck that went toward taming cycles had begun to build up. So, for Naruto's 9th birthday, she bought him a Pokeball using her newfound savings. So overjoyed was he with his gift from someone he had started falling in love with, he asked her if she would give him one more gift. That was the day their intimate excursions into the world of in love had begun. Shortly after his 10th birthday, Minato and Kushina had decided to confront Urza. They were standing in an empty hallway. Urza looked quite upset, worrying what the lord and lady of the house wanted to speak with her privately about. Minato took a deep breath and sighed. "I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go, Urza-san," he said firmly. Why?" she asked as tears began to fill her eyes. "Haven't I done everything you asked me to do?" "You have, Urza-san," Kushina said quickly. "And we really appreciate it. But, we know about you and Naruto's intimacy." Urza paled, covering her mouth with her hands. She was afraid of something like this happening when she first started falling in love with Naruto. It was why they were always careful when they started to become intimate. "We think it would be best if you simply stopped working here, and never saw our son again," Minato stated coldly. The tears that were welled up in Urza's eyes were now spilling out as she pushed past Minato and Kushina, through the front door and slamming it behind her. "What the hell was that?" said the cold, emotionless voice of their only son, catching them off guard. "Naruto," Kushina said in surprise before collecting herself. "Watch your mouth, young man. That is no way to speak to your parents." "No," he said in the same cold tone, causing the two adults to wince as if they had been stricken unsuspectingly. "Now I'll ask you again. What the hell was that, and don't give me an answer that you think I want to hear." "We did what was best for you, Naruto," Minato said in a placating manner, but Naruto would have none of it. "Bullshit," he spat, leveling a glare toward his father. "If you wanted to do what was best for me, you would have come to me before firing Urza-chan. You spend all of your time with Mito and Naruto that you completely forget you have a son. Urza-chan was there for me. She at least cared enough to remember my birthday while you spent all day with the twins and the clan heads. Every year. Not just once or twice, but for the last 7 fucking years. And now, all of a sudden, you decide that you want to do what's best for me? Why not teach me how to unlock my chakra like you taught the twins? Why not teach me how to be a ninja like you taught the twins? Why do you pretend I don't exist? You don't understand, Naruto-kun, Kushina-kun. We need to teach them how to harness the power of Kyuubi so they can become the best ninja in the village," Naruto asked harshly. "So they can show their enemies how powerful Konoha is with 2 Jinchuriki. Go on. I'm very curious as to why they would need to learn how to use it when they cannot be influenced by Kyuubi herself since her soul was devoured by Zalera." Minato and Kushina bit their lips, trying to come up with an answer. "Please, Naruto-kun," Minato pleaded to his furious son. "You have to understand that everything we do has a reason. We need you to trust us." "Trust you?" Naruto scoffed. "You want me to trust you after you threw away what feels like the only source of happiness I have ever had in this family? Trust you that the reason I'm not learning to become a ninja or a tamer from either you or the academy is for my own good, but you have no problem letting Mito and Naruto go to become ninja tamers? Trust is a two-way street and you have done nothing to earn it from me. Now, if you don't have anything important to say, I'm going to find Urza-chan." Naruto pushed past his parents and was about to walk out of the front door when a glowing chain shot out and wrapped around the wrist that was wrapped around the doorknob. He turned around and his cold eyes landed on Kushina's outstretched hand that had a glowing chain leaving her palm. "I can't let you go after her, Naruto-kun," she said firmly. "What are you going to do?" Naruto asked. "Punish me? Send me to my room? Beat me with those chains of yours? Do it. Punish me. Punish the son you have ignored for the last 7 years for trying to help the closest person he has to a friend who has made him feel loved for once in his miserable life." Kushina flinched, her chain slacking slightly at the reminder Naruto had so viciously delivered. Naruto tore his wrist free from the loosened chain. "I thought so," he said victoriously before opening the door and running outside in search for his best friend and lover. As he searched high and low for Urza, he found himself wandering through the park. When his gaze landed on the chess tables, there was only one person sitting at them. He was an older man, like many who visited the tables. He wore a brown traveling cloak that hid most of his features from view save for the gray hair that poked out of the front, a tired smile, and his glowing blue eyes. He was short, seen as his legs dangled over the edge of the chair with a foot or so between the soles of his feet and the grassy floor. He motioned for Naruto to take the seat in front of him, the chessboard having already been set up while he sat there, most likely. Curious, Naruto hopped on the opposite chair. "Hello, my boy," he said. His accent was thick with a foreign tongue that he had never heard before, yet he spoke the native language fluently in spite of it. "Hello, Oji-sama," Naruto said politely. "Have you seen a crying bunny girl come past here?" "I have," the man admitted, causing Naruto's mood to perk up. It felt only proper to give her time to herself as she ran by. So sad to see anyone in such a state. Naruto nodded. "Which direction did she go?" The old man chuckled. "Don't worry," he said. "She isn't going any further. I wanted to play a game of chess. Since you wandered by and I'm all alone, would you like to play with me?" Naruto looked down sadly, nodding his head slightly. "She must really mean a lot to you." "She means everything to me," Naruto said, the conviction in his voice undoubtable. "For a boy as young as you, it does my heart good to see such passion between a pokegirl and her tamer," the old man said with a sigh of contentment as the game began. "I'm not her tamer," Naruto admitted. "Not yet at least. She used to be a maid for my family. Over time, our relationship blossomed and I love her. When my parents found out, they fired her and told her never to see me again." Naruto had no idea why he was suddenly saying these things to a complete stranger, but he couldn't stop. He wanted to get this off of his chest. He moved a piece on his side of the board and the game continued. "I'm not going to let them or anyone get in the way of my happiness." "You sound like I did when I was young," the old man said with a sigh of content and mild sorrow. "Full of anger and love. If you continue down that path, only pain and loneliness await you." "I don't hate my family," he said before thinking a moment. "No, rather, they annoy me. I wanted to be a ninja, but they won't teach me how to harness my chakra. I want to be a tamer, but they pushed away the only pokegirl I was close to. They are so focused on the twins that they often forget I even exist. They go out to eat and my only company is Urza. She showed me that she cares for me. That she loves me far more than my own family seems to. How am I supposed to feel when I have all of these conflicting emotions?" "I see," the man said to himself as he moved yet another piece only for Naruto to take it and him to take the piece that took his own. "Tell me, Naruto boy, what would you say if I could help you follow your dream? To be able to become the kind of man you see yourself becoming?" Naruto's eyes widened. "You can unlock my chakra?" he asked almost desperately. The man shook his head. "Unfortunately, I've never learned how to harness chakra myself. But I do know of another power that I can easily access for you. It will be up to you to learn how to harness that power, though. Learn how to control it. Fight with it. Forge bonds with it." Naruto seemed to nod eagerly. "While I can't unlock your chakra, I can separate it into its two base components, mana and ki. Mana is used by mages to cast spells similar to how shinobi used chakra to perform their ninjutsu, but it is far easier to manipulate. Ki is the physical aspect that is capable of enhancing your physical prowess by saturating your body, making it stronger and more durable than most. Ki, for those who are not well versed in how to manipulate it, is more difficult to use outside of your body. When they combine to form chakra, the rigidity of ki and the fluidity of mana makes it harder to draw out, but gives ninja and samurai the extra power that they need to perform their techniques or jutsu. However, once mana and ki are separated, they can never be united to form chakra again. Shinobi capable of using magic usually do so because they have more mana than ki and the different balance allows them to channel their excess mana into spells. Other than those very few people, it is virtually impossible for a shinobi to be able to use magic. However, I seem to recall that Vale Magical Academy sends representatives to the elemental nations after finding one woman here in Konoha capable of using mana. They are the best people to go to if you want to master your mana. That is, if you want me to separate your chakra for you." Naruto bit his lip. If these people could take him away from Konoha or even the elemental nations, he could finally step out of the shadows of his sisters and be his own person. But that would cost him his chakra in the end. "All right," he said with a nod. "I'll do it." "Good," the man said with a grin. He stepped off of the stool and placed his hand on Naruto's head. The young boy felt a wave of energy wash throughout his body. He could actually feel the renewed energy rush through his body and a new sense of strength that accompanied it. The man withdrew his hand and nodded in satisfaction. "Done." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "That was it? Huh. He kinda expected it to hurt seeing as he was practically splitting his chakra into two separate energies that were used to make it. That's it? Yep, the man said happily. Huh, he dumbly replied. Your Pokegirl is just a bit deeper into the park, the man said. Sitting by the lake. I'd suggest you capture her and then go find the Vale Magical Academy's representatives. They won't be here for much longer. Thank you for everything, Gigi, Naruto said, bowing to the elderly man who helped him to get started on the path to his dreams. The man waved him off. Don't worry about it, Naruto boy, he said with a gleam in his hidden eyes and a smirk on his lips. I'm sure you will find everything you're looking for in due time. Hopefully, this steers you away from the path I took when my best friend and I were having similar troubles. Naruto nodded and ran off, unaware that he had left the chess game or even played it. The old man looked at the placement of the remaining pieces. It looks like I have chosen my heir better than I had thought, he said as he noticed he had been put in checkmate with no routes of escape. He knocked over his king and started to vanish from sight. I just hope he doesn't make the same mistakes I did. Naruto searched the park near and far before finally spotting the lake the old man must have been talking about. Sitting at the edge of the lake was a weeping bunny girl he recognized immediately. Urza-chan, Naruto called out excitedly before running toward the sobbing Pokegirl. Urza's ears perked up when she picked up the familiar cry, causing her to turn around just as an orange blur flew directly into her S and felt a pair of tiny arms wrap around her body. She wrapped her arms around his head, still sobbing slightly, and gave a faint smile. He looked up from his position between her S and gave her a half-hearted glare. Don't you ever run away from me like that again, he said flatly. But Lord Namikaze, she started, still sobbing lightly. She refused to use his first name since she no longer worked for him and did not feel right addressing him so familiarly after they had explicitly told her never to see Naruto again. Naruto pulled his head back from her bountiful bosom and prodded one of her large S with his finger, making her blush as his finger was swallowed by the fleshy mound. You don't work for Hokage-sama or Lady Namikaze, he told her before turning away from her cute gaze with a small blush of his own. You're my Pokegirl. The only person you should care about is me. He pulled out the Pokeball she had bought him for his birthday last year. When you bought me this, you said that you'd stay by my side for the rest of your life. Will you still abide by that promise? I'm sorry for upsetting you too badly, Naruto-kun, she said, wiping away the remaining tears that stained her face before bowing to him. Please accept me as your Pokegirl. Naruto smiled and tapped Urza's head with the red and white orb. A crimson beam shot out from it, engulfing her in it before retreating into the Pokeball. The ball wiggled only once before a ding echoed through the forest, signifying that the capture had been successful. He pressed the button on the front and the same light shot toward the ground before disappearing, revealing Urza standing there as if she had not been captured by the Pokeball. Is there anything I can do for you, young master? She said in a seductive tone. We're going home, he said in response. After that, we're going to have lunch followed by going into the village. I have a few errands to run in town today. Very well, she said happily, knowing what to expect when they got home. Is there anything I should know about these errands we'll be running? Naruto nodded as she led them to the Namikaze estate. First on the agenda is to get you a couple of outfits. Once that's done, I heard rumors that a group of people are here searching for magically talented or magically gifted individuals for some place called the Vale Magical Academy. If I can't become a ninja and my parents refuse to let me become a tamer, I need to find some way to get out of here and do something rather than become a civilian for the rest of my life. Do you think you have a talent for magic? She asked him curiously. He got that twinkle in his eye. The one that usually meant he had a plan or he was happy with the outcome of something he had been keeping an eye on. I believe I do, he said with a sense of finality, letting her know he wanted to drop the subject until he was ready to tell her the full story. Urza nodded with a brilliant smile. She had absolute faith in Naruto. If he said he wanted to become a mage, she would support him regardless of how things would turn out for them. She loved him and those sentiments would not be dashed away as quickly as Lord and Lady Namikaze had hoped. Naruto was her master now, therefore, she would not hesitate to put him before anyone else. She would do everything she could for him, for his happiness. When the pair finally reached the Namikaze estate, they found Minato and Kushina talking among themselves in the living room. Before they could silently slip past them, they managed to overhear a small portion of their conversation. I wish I had let Zalera take me when I had the chance, Minato said with a slight slur. Naruto had known his father had occasionally drank, but never to the point of inebriation. You had no way to know that I would live after having Kyuubi torn from me, Kushina said firmly. Even Tsunade-sama doesn't know how I survived. You were only looking out for our children. Maybe, but if I had, Naruto might have been able to become a ninja. Maybe even a proper tamer or even a ninja tamer, he spat venomously. But because I didn't, she took almost all of his chakra, and maybe even his blood gifts. As the pair walked down the street, they spotted a small shop with a sewing needle and a spool of thread on it. Upon walking in, they spotted a woman wearing a rather fashionable yellow dress with orange and crimson highlights. Her auburn hair was kept short and her silver eyes looked as sharp as the needles she worked with. "Hello and welcome to Heart Cruise Designs," she said happily. "How can I help you today?" "I'm looking for a couple of outfits for Urza-chan," he said. The woman began to look rather giddy as she looked Urza up and down before quickly drawing a measuring tape from somewhere and zipping along like a cheetah that had too much coffee, taking measurements of Urza's body. "Okay," she said as she rolled up the tape. Big 3 measurements are 37-inch bust, 21-inch waist, and 33-inch hips. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, damn. AG cup. Don't see many of those walk in. This is going to be a challenge to make something that brings out all that why. Her grin widened and her eyes glowed even brighter. She loved challenging customers. "So what kind of outfit do you want?" "I just want some basic details. Color? Design? That kind of thing." "Well, I definitely want something that stands out," Urza said confidently. "At least one outfit in orange or a similar color. My young master loves the color orange. I also want them to accentuate my S, giving him easy access to them while concealing them from others." "Believe me," the woman said. "If I had puppies like those, I would consider hiding them a sin. I would also like to get her one for formal occasions and one for casual wear," Naruto called as he opened his wallet, pulling out a small stack of bills. "Is this going to be enough?" She dashed over, grabbed the stack, and began to count. When she got halfway through, her eyes were wide. At the end of it, she had tears coming from her silver eyes. "How? She asked before shaking her head. "Never mind. With this much money, I'll make your outfits the envy of the world. These will be some of my greatest masterpieces ever designed." She grabbed Urza by the hand and proceeded to drag her to the back room. Before the door shut, Urza's maid uniform had been tossed out and the door was soon locked behind them. Naruto took the moment to sit down in the lobby, reading whatever magazines were sitting on the table. Most of them were of famous Pokegirl models in very revealing outfits that brought out their best traits. After a few hours, Urza walked out and caught her master's attention with ease. She wore a purple, revealing kimono consisting of a short sleeveless tunic decorated in several orange flower motifs, with revealing openings on the sides and front, exposing much of the bunny girl's ample chest, and held closed by both a large, dark obi, which had a thin red rope tied around it and sporting a wide closing ribbon on the back, and by a lighter, smaller, white belt, which were both wrapped around an orange, flower-patterned cloth circling her waist on the back and the sides. "What do you think, young master?" she asked, giving him a twirl and showing off the movement of the clothing. "Beautiful," he said almost breathlessly. "Thank you," the seamstress replied with pride in her voice. "This is going to be her formal outfit." Naruto nodded in understanding. "With the amount of money you gave me, I was able to use some rather exotic materials to give it a few special properties. It's incredibly elastic, meaning that as she evolves, it will expand or contract to always fit her body type. By pushing its elasticity even further, it prevents anyone from using it to bind or strangle her should you get into a fight or be caught off guard and captured. I call it the robe of Yuan." Naruto nodded with a smile. "I love it. I knew you would," she said excitedly. "Now, we're going to make her a more casual outfit." Once again, the two disappeared into the back room. Unlike the first time, the two came back in far less time. When they did, Naruto was left looking gobsmacked. Featuring very few decorative parts, her attire was more like a fancy swimsuit bearing a resemblance to a cheetah. The top took the form of a very revealing, cheetah-patterned bikini top, in correspondence to Urza's large S and some fur lining the lower edges. Rather than pants, Urza was sporting a pair of revealing black shorts, with a belt holding a cloth hanging over Urza's left leg attached to them. Her arms were covered by dark armbands reaching up just below her shoulders, with Urza's left arm covered by a cheetah patterned armband. Her legs were covered in similar stockings reaching up to her thighs with designer high-heeled boots over them, with the left boot reaching up to the knee. The right leg, on the other hand, is covered by a boot only reaching up to part of her calf. The outfit was completed by a large collar around her neck and by a tail hanging from the back of her shorts, both made of bushy fur, plus a pair of large cheetah ears adorning both sides of her head. It looked strange when they looked to be close to where her bunny ears were, but when she evolved, it might not look so out of place. All in all, Naruto would swear that Urza would have made a beautiful cheetah. Totally worth the price, he said with a warm smile. And if you ever need to add armor to any of her clothes, a Heart Cruise blacksmith should be able to do it for a smaller price than if you had gotten a custom armor done there, she said proudly. This outfit was made with the same elastic materials, but not nearly as much as the robe of Yuan, so it will change to fit whatever size she becomes as she evolves. I also made it with a very light and aerodynamic material so that she has maximum allowed movement with minimal drag, granting her a boost to her speed. However, seeing as bunny girls are already pretty fast, it might not be as noticeable. Urza walked over to Naruto's side and wrapped him in a massive hug, smothering his face in her S once more. Naruto was quick to return the hug before they bid the seamstress farewell and left with a small package that contained the robe of Yuan. Naruto began to walk toward the Ninja and Tamer Academy, causing Urza to become curious since she had never had to come this way during her time with the Namikaze family. "Where are we going, young master?" Urza asked. "Ninja and Tamer Academy," Naruto replied. "If there are people from an academy where they teach others how to perform magic and control it, they would likely be at the one place where people are being trained to become ninjas and tamers to scout out those with potential to harness mana. If memory serves, it is almost impossible for anyone with chakra to be able to use mana, but when one person did, they were offered a chance to see if they could use magic. Since then, they come every so often to see if any more rare gems like that person would show up. At least, that's the rumor around town." Urza nodded. Within a matter of minutes, the two were standing in front of the Ninja and Tamer Academy. It wasn't terribly difficult to find. Just a bit out of the way for those who didn't have children attending. The closer they got, the more they could see. Students were in a semicircle listening to a soup-broad genius give them a lecture on Pokegirls, while Chunin teachers, made kind of obvious by their flak jackets, were teaching students a series of moves that looked a lot like the martial arts kata he had seen the twins practicing with Minato. However, sitting on a small bench, overlooking the various students, were three different-looking men wearing similar robes. Two looked rather young, likely in their late 20s to early 30s. The man that sat between them was much older. His silvery eyes held wisdom deep within them and a unique sense of power to match. While Naruto was looking around, contemplating what to do, the older man's eyes perked up as he felt something he had only sensed on his trip here nearly 15 years ago. The familiar tingle of magic and mana entered his mind, and he turned his head slightly to see Naruto with his uniquely dressed bunny girl companion. The old man smiled before standing up, causing his two companions to do the same. "Do you sense something, Master Geralt?" one young man with brown hair and green eyes had asked. "Maybe," Geralt said before walking over to the boy who caught his attention. "Excuse me, young man. Could you spare us a moment of your time?" Naruto snapped out of his daze when the older man spoke to him directly. He nodded somewhat weakly. "Of course, Ojii-sama," Naruto replied with a bow of his head, which Urza copied promptly. Geralt turned his attention to his companions. "Marcus, Alexander," he called in an authoritative tone, grabbing their attention. "Let's go to the library. It should be private enough to have our discussion." He turned toward Naruto. "If that would be suitable for you, of course." Naruto shrugged his shoulders. "It doesn't matter to me." It wasn't long before Naruto, Urza, and the trio who accompanied them had found themselves in the library in a large room tucked away somewhere. Geralt moved to the closed door and placed strange-looking symbols across it. As he did this, Alexander and Marcus began to set out a series of items on the conference table in front of him. What struck him as odd was that none of the items seemed to have any common theme with the other aside from the fact that they had nothing in common. Once the room was set up to their satisfaction, Naruto was seated in a chair with Urza choosing to stand behind him as a mostly precautionary manner while the other three sat across from him. "What's your name, son?" Geralt asked in a kind tone. "Naruto," he admitted. "Naruto Uzumaki." "Well then, Mr. Uzumaki, what do you know about magic?" the elderly man asked. Naruto paused as he thought about the question for a moment. "Magic is kind of like the ninjutsu and genjutsu that ninjas use," he answered hesitantly. Chakra is partially comprised of mana, the power mages use to perform magic, and gives ninjutsu and genjutsu their magic-like properties, while the other half is made up of ki, the more physical aspect of chakra, which is used by ninjas in their taijutsu. A somewhat basic textbook answer, but that just about sums it up to a degree, Alexander said with a smile, causing Naruto's confidence to grow to a small degree. "Have you ever accessed your mana before?" Geralt asked. Naruto shook his head negative. "All right, in order for you to perform any of these tests, you need to be able to summon your mana. Thankfully, we half expected that to be the case and set up the room accordingly. Now, follow my instructions and you will be able to access your mana." Naruto nodded vigorously. "Close your eyes and begin to focus on your body. When you have an unobstructed focus, feel around for a large pool of energy coming from your core." Naruto nodded and did as Geralt had said. He sat down, crossing his legs as he had seen the occasional monk from the fire temple do on their yearly visits to Konoha, and began to close out the world around him. The sounds of Geralt's voice seemed to dull into a mildly annoying hum before even that could no longer be heard. As he searched for the sensation the aged mage had told him to look for, he began to feel something humming just beneath the surface of what he was trying to sense. Cautiously, he reached out to it, and the closer he got, the more melodic the hum began to sound. He continued to reach out before nothing. He opened his eyes and began looking around. Rather than seeing the room he had been in or the trio of mages, he saw, quite possibly, the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on. She bore crimson eyes with long, strawberry blonde hair that looked a shade or two away from being orange that cascaded down her back and shoulders like a curtain. Her eyes twinkled with a mischievous glow as a smirk danced upon her lips. She turned toward him and his eyes had begun to memorize her every curve. Her eyes were perky and large, though nowhere near as large as Urza's, with light pink areolas sitting atop the bountiful mounds. If he were to hazard a guess, he would say she was a DD cup, at the very least, though without a way to gather her measurements, he had no way to know. Her vagina was neatly trimmed in a way that was pleasing to the eye. 9 strawberry blonde tails, again bordering the orange color scale, danced behind her, each one swaying, but never touching any of the other 8 tails. Before he knew it, she was walking toward him while he was practically frozen in place. The closer she got, the more he found himself realizing just who was in front of him. As she wrapped him up in a warm embrace, pressing his face between her s, he uttered a single word. "Kyubi." He heard her sigh before gently pushing him away and placing a hand on his cheek, a frown marring her natural beauty. "What is it with you ninjin and your insufferable need to call others by something other than their proper name?" she asked him somewhat harshly. Naruto winced. "Sorry," he muttered in a barely audible whisper. She huffed before running a thumb across his cheek, gently stroking the whisker like birthmarks on his cheek. "I suppose I can't exactly blame you," she said teasingly. "I doubt anybody know my name, and I doubt they were in a hurry to learn it while I was occupied before I was sealed away. It's Yasaka, by the way." Naruto tried to shake himself from his stupor. "But I thought Zelera devoured your soul," he said shakily. Yasaka retracted her hand from his cheek as if she had somehow burned herself. Her frown turned into a frightening snarl as she snorted. "I simply did not expect that fool of a father of yours to summon an esper when he couldn't and shouldn't have been able to use magic," she spat. "I'd rather have my soul devoured than have my power completely severed from my soul and placed into a pair of brats while I'm stuck here, powerless, tied to your very soul by what little of Zelera's power that binds us together." She sighed sadly before smirking back at him. "At least I didn't get the short end of the deal. You, my dear Jinchuriki, are far more interesting than the rest of your pathetic village. Far more interesting than even I initially thought." She conjured a comfortable love seat before sitting down in it, forcing Naruto to sit in her lap. What?" he stuttered as she enveloped his tiny body in hers, and a brilliant blush lit up his cheeks as he felt her s rub against the sides of his head, each one sitting comfortably on each of his shoulders. "Even without my power, you have far more potential than any shinobi could hope to dream of. She whispered sensually in his ear, sending shivers down his spine. Unlike chakra and your ninjutsu, magic is a talent with limitless potential. All you need is a sharp mind, talent, and an endless imagination. I've seen ninjas spend years of their lives learning a single ninjutsu technique and even longer than that to invent one that nobody has ever seen before. However, magic is different. Mages can spend their entire lives learning and mastering hundreds, if not thousands, of spells, whereas the typical ninja might only have a couple of dozen at his disposal at any point in time. You can do virtually anything you put your mind to with mana, while those with chakra will only be able to do things that have been done by many others before them. She placed her right hand on his bare right pectoral while her left hovered very close to his crotch. She took a deep breath through her nose, almost as if she was taking in his very scent, before releasing a sigh of contentment. If there is one thing you should be thankful for, it is that your Uzumaki longevity and powerful life force are bound to your blood rather than your chakra, she said huskily, her voice echoing the level of desire she had built up over the years as a prisoner within her Jinchuriki. If that were not the case, my soul might have devoured yours, granting me a mortal existence. Of course, I would have eventually returned to being a Kyuubi once I hit puberty, free of my temporary mortal body and able to be free once again. Do you know how dreadful it has been being a prisoner in the body of two separate women? She asked, her voice growing irritated the more she spoke. I had to force myself to endure Mito and Kushina mating with their respective husbands just so my own power would remain my own. I tried to force them to threshold, but those blasted seals always prevented them from becoming Pokegirls. Naruto winced as her nails scratched the surface of his skin, but did not draw blood. It was still painful. She looked down at his pained face and relaxed her body. Sorry, Naruto-kun, she said honestly with a sensual tone to it. I'm just very frustrated with your lineage, trying to take that which does not belong to them for the sake of power. Now, however, they actually managed to separate my power from my soul without knowing the repercussions for doing such a thing. What do you mean, Yasaka-san? Naruto asked, partly curious and partly fearful for what could befall his sisters. Despite everything, he still loved the twins with every fiber of his being. It wasn't their fault his parents practically ignored his existence for the last 7 years. She smiled sweetly at his use of her proper name. I don't know, she said plainly. As I said before, it's never happened before. It will affect their blood gifts and curses. That much is what I am sure of. However, if they try to use my power, there is nothing there to regulate the amount they can access. If they access too much, they could very well lose complete control. They would surrender to their instincts, grasping for more power until they went completely insane or until someone killed them or sealing away my power from them. With the dwindling number of sealing experts in the world, I'd wager that the first or second would be the most likely scenarios. Naturally, when your sisters die, my power would almost certainly return to me. And with practically all of my power in your body, it would become too much for your body to handle and I would be set free when my power inevitably overloads your body. Thankfully, you have a way to prevent them from drawing too much power. How? He asked, his throat dry from the idea of dying should Mito and Naruto die. Why? Me, of course, she said smoothly. Even if I don't have my power, it will still respond to my soul. I could subjugate it, but that would be like putting a band-aid on a leaking boat. A temporary fix. The long-term solution would be for me to absorb it, but then you face the same problem. Too much power. You die. I'm free. Does every scenario of you getting free result in my untimely death? He asked flatly. Pretty much, she said with a shrug of her shoulders. But you shouldn't worry about that. I would never do anything to harm you intentionally. Why? Well, because you are different from my last jailers, she replied sweetly. You are far more open-minded than those who surround you. Rather than see me as a beast of destruction and rage, you actually listened to me. Not that I gave you much choice, mind you, but it still means a lot to me anyway. What? He asked weakly, causing her to giggle. I could feel it, she said dreamily. I was barely awake at the time. Mostly trying to sleep and try and get back even an ounce of my power. When you met that cloaked old man, he separated your chakra. I could feel it, your ki flowing through every pore in your body. Your mana revitalizing and reinforcing your chakra coils to adapt to holding and using mana and creating your second origin. It washed through my soul and woke me up, I guess you could say. When I finally found myself awake, I took the chance to go through your memories. Learn more about you. What drives you? What annoys you? What turns you on? At this, Naruto blushed as he felt her embrace him even further into her bosom. He could feel both of her fleshy mounds all over his face and, against his own mental cries, his fetish had won out and his body relaxed. So naturally, I want to see you flourish, she said merrily. But in order to do that, I needed to meet with you, which brings us to where we are now. When you tried to draw on your mana, it was the perfect time to draw you into your mindscape, the plane between the dreaming and the real world. Naruto's brow furrowed. So, have I called on my mana yet? He asked curiously. She nodded. You did, she admitted proudly. It was a large burst for someone calling out to it for their first time, but doing so knocked you unconscious due to how relatively new this new power is to your body. Even now, your body is getting accustomed to it, so it temporarily shut down until it could completely acclimate, which shouldn't take more than 30 minutes to an hour tops. So aside from meeting me, he started, why did you bring me here? To get to know you better, she replied as if it was something he should have known. Your memories tell me one thing. However, to get to know who you are as a person, I had to connect with you personally rather than base my understanding of you on your memories. She sighed heavily. Believe it or not, whether we like it or not, our souls are bound together by something other than a silly ninja's attempt at a rune that they call seals. If we had been, I would have simply killed you, taken over your body, and gone my merry way. However, Zalera is the Esper of death. Even her powers are able to extinguish the lives of those who cross her path with ease. However, by using her power to seal my soul into you, she has essentially bound our fates together. It is entirely likely that if you die, I might very well die also. If I had access to even a fraction of my power, I might have been able to find a suitable body, overtake their soul, and essentially revive myself, though I would be forced to evolve into a Kyuubi the hard way, and I didn't fancy a Nagatsune when I was but a kid. As it stands, we can either ignore one another, pretending the other doesn't exist, or we can work together, hopefully find a way to regain my body or, at the very least, one that is similar to my original body, and coexist far better than most Jinchuriki could ever hope for. And how am I supposed to trust that you won't try and break free? He asked skeptically. She sighed. This is where all of the terrible things she had done would inevitably come back to bite her. I'm not asking you to trust me completely, she said solemnly. I'll be the first to admit that I'm no saint. I've done some terrible things in my life that I'm not proud of anymore. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove my sincerity. If I blow it, you'll never have to see me or talk to me ever again. Can you give me that much? Just one chance to prove that I want to help you? Naruto paused as he mulled over her words. On one hand, she wasn't responsible for the attack on Konoha since she had been sealed away in his mother prior to assaulting Konoha and being separated from her power. On the other hand, she was a kitsune. She could be trying to trick him into retrieving her power for her own desires and to hopefully free her. She made it all too clear how she could use him to regain her lost power, then kill him so she would be released. Did he trust her? No, not by a long shot. Hell had a better chance of freezing over. Could he give her a chance to redeem herself for her past sins? Give her a chance for the absolution she seemed to be searching for? He sighed. All right, he said, I'll give you a chance. If he didn't, he feared that he would be just like his parents, refusing to give him the chance to prove that he had what it took to be a ninja, regardless of the issue with his chakra. But you'll have to earn my trust. If you feel like something you have to say is important, I want you to speak up about it. I want to trust you, Yasaka-san, but to blindly trust someone is just as dangerous as being too paranoid to trust anyone. Yasaka squealed in excitement, causing Naruto to thank whatever god or goddess was being merciful that her s were acting like fleshy headphones, blocking out the worst of the noise. She jumped from the love seat and spun around, either ignoring or simply oblivious to the fact that she still had Naruto wedged between her s. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she said happily. I won't let you down. I promise. It wasn't until she felt the weight of his body begin to fade that she smiled even brighter. And it looks like you're about to wake up. Don't worry, we'll still be able to talk. Now that we've come to this understanding, I'll be able to establish a psychic connection that should allow me to communicate with you telepathically. If you don't want people to think you're crazy, I would suggest simply thinking what you want to say to me. Naruto nodded and closed his eyes as his body began to fade from his mindscape. Everything began to return to him slowly. His hearing, his breathing, the world around him burst forth into bright colors as his eyes slowly fluttered open. The lighting of the room seemed to go from blinding to tolerable just as slowly as his eyes began to open. "He's awake," he heard, though it sounded like a dull throb in his head. "Of course, Alexander," Geralt replied from his seated position to Naruto's left. After all, his body is naturally geared toward using chakra. For anyone else, they would have easily summoned it to the surface, but for one to gather an energy that their body is not familiar with and attempt to do the same, it could easily cause one to fall unconscious at best. "And the worst-case scenario, Master Geralt?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "Excruciating pain the likes of which I would never dream of," Geralt said. His body had to force itself to accommodate mana coursing through his body as well as develop his second origin. If he were not unconscious at the time that this happened, his cries would breach any soundproofing rune we laid down and his body would be incapable of moving for weeks, if not longer, due to the process. Naruto coughed, allowing himself to sit upright from his laid-down position. "How was that?" he asked roughly. Even to Alexander and Marcus, who were still considered novices under Master Geralt's teachings, could tell that his body was still struggling to move. But Naruto was a stubborn-looking child. Urza the bunny girl had simply laid his head on her lap and stroked his hair with a smile, saying that she had nothing but pure faith in her young master to fulfill his ambitions of becoming a mage. "You did far better than most who awakened their mana for the first time," Geralt praised. "Even for the short amount of time you began to channel it, you had outperformed many of our more advanced students. However, you lack control. That, thankfully, is something that can be worked on at the academy, and for these tests, it might get us better results." Naruto nodded, his eyes turned steely and cold as he mentally and physically prepared himself. "There are a grand total of 11 foci to test how much potential you show for certain schools of magic that are taught at the academy. One by one, you will take them in your hand and channel your mana through it. Based on the reactions from the objects, we'll determine the level of potential you have for that school. Most people who have been chosen by Vale or were scouted passed 2 of the tests with amazing results at the very least. If you don't pass any of the tests, you can still apply, though the process would most definitely be lengthy." "I understand," he replied. "Good," Geralt said with a gentle smile. "Your first test will be of invocation and evocation. Take hold of the rod and do not worry. The flames that will spill out from it are harmless and will not damage the room." Naruto took the rod in hand and was surprised when it burst into flames. He nearly dropped it, but his mind regained control. His hand was not burning or hurting from being in contact with the flames. So he did as he was asked and channeled his mana into the rod. The flames shot from the tip at a startling pace. Within seconds, the flames had touched the ceiling and spread out to the sides. The room was 12 feet tall from floor to ceiling. The fact that the flames had managed to go around 8 feet in the air and continued to fill the room was shocking. If Geralt had performed this test outdoors, it would likely have become a beacon for the ninja of the village to congregate around, likely leading to questions he did not wish to answer. "That's enough, Naruto," Geralt said, writing down a note on a piece of paper. Naruto set down the rod. As soon as it stopped touching his skin, the flames disappeared almost magically, he silently joked to himself. "Next, take that crest in hand." Naruto nodded and did as he was told. As he channeled his mana into the crest, a small sphere began to grow. Larger and larger the sphere grew before it stopped. He tried to channel even more mana into the crest, but the result was the same. "I see," Alexander said as Geralt began to scribble down a few notes. "I was able to make a bigger one when I was tested, but not by much." "It's still an impressive feat, Naruto." The boy glowed at the amount of praise he was receiving. It was strange to hear such praise not come from Urza, but not unwelcomed or unappreciated. Naruto set down the crest and picked up a clear crystal. The colors shifted quickly from red to orange, then it changed to a bronze color, followed by even more metallic colors. It flew through every metallic color in the spectrum before settling on a platinum color. "Very impressive," Marcus remarked. "You have 3 incredible talents and the tests have only just begun. I wonder how you'll do with the others." Naruto picked up a bubble wand that he had seen a few kids around Konoha play with. He channeled his mana once again and bubbles began to spit out of it. They weren't being shot out at a rapid pace, but it was steady, blowing out about 5 average-size bubbles per second. Maybe I should have kept that to myself. Naruto looked toward Marcus curiously. Was that a bad result? He asked nervously. No, Geralt commented. It wasn't like the second ninja, a young girl, we found with a vast magic potential, but it wasn't nothing either. You have a talent, but it is nowhere near as great as your first 3 tests had proven. Truthfully, it is expected that one person cannot be incredibly talented in every aspect of magic. Even the most powerful sorcerers and witches usually specialize in 1 or 2 schools rather than try to master every school of magic there is. Naruto nodded, replacing the bubble wand with a bone of some kind? He channeled mana through it, but nothing happened. No sounds, no shaking, nothing. It was just an ordinary bone. I see, Geralt said. Did you know that your second Hokage was a mage? Naruto's eyes widened. He was an incredibly gifted individual. My master was the one who recruited him while I, as his apprentice, was simply there to observe. That thigh bone in your hands? It is used to figure out how much potential someone has for necromancy. He almost broke the bone as much as it vibrated and rattled in his hand. Since then, I have never come across an individual as talented in the art as he was. Naruto quickly placed the bone down. That he had touched an object that nearly broke in the hands of Lord Second was something he never expected to hear, but he had, and it was a bit awe-inspiring for him to hear that even a Hokage had been able to become a mage. He quickly picked up the next object, a green orb that felt slimy, but left no residue on his hand. He channeled his mana into the sphere and it began to change shape. It was slow to reach a pyramid, before it turned into a cube, then into a cylinder, then into a discus. Then it stopped changing. Alexander sighed in frustration. 3 tests passed with great results. 2 tests with average results. And no talent for necromancy. You are being very difficult to pin down, aren't you? Naruto ignored him and picked up a golden token that he had seen kids spend at the arcade in town. Channeling his mana into it, it began to glow. When it was finished, it was a little brighter than a glowstick, but not as bright as a light bulb. Naruto shrugged his shoulders as he set the token down and took a moment to breathe, easing the tension in his body and allowing his mana to return to him. He had 4 more items to test, it seemed. He reached down to the foam projectile and channeled his mana into it. What he didn't expect was for a thick, purple smoke to engulf the room within seconds. Naruto hastily set the item down and allowed the purple smoke to dissipate. When the smoke cleared, the trio were looking at him with wide eyes. Geralt quickly wrote down a note before seemingly underlining it several times. The next item was a red staff. He channeled mana into it, but nothing happened. Geralt made note of this too. Naruto grabbed a tan robe and channeled his mana into it. However, the robe only seemed to brighten in colors slightly from tan to an off-white color. He set that down and grabbed hold of a Pokégirl plushie that looked like Urza with a serious reduction in blonde hair. He channeled his mana into the doll and was surprised when it latched onto his arm. His eyes widened when he felt his mana leave him, even thought he tried to cut it off. Can someone get this thing off of me? He asked hurriedly as he tried to cut his mana off and began to yank at the doll. Alexander was holding a stopwatch. The longer the doll hung on, clinging to Naruto, the wider his eyes went. Eventually, the stopwatch had hit the 30-minute mark and the doll had yet to release her latest victim. "Half an hour, Master Geralt," he said, his voice shaking. "What's the time limit supposed to be?" "An hour," Geralt said as if he was used to seeing the sight in front of them. 15 minutes later, the doll had finally released Naruto and the boy had climbed into the arms of his bunny girl, shooting a glare at the plushie. "Not bad, Naruto. You have great potential for invocation, evocation, abjuration, conjuration, summoning, black magic, and blue magic. You have above-average talent for illusions, transmutation, and enchantment, charms. A basic talent for white magic, though you likely won't be healing anything more than minor wounds. And no talent for necromancy and red magic. All in all, you are shaping up to be an incredibly talented mage. I have no doubt that you'll be allowed to enroll as a student in Vale Magical Academy." Naruto smiled brightly. He could finally take charge of his life. "So when do we leave?" he asked. "Since school doesn't start until August 16th, You'll have to wait until you turn 11 to actually begin taking classes, Geralt said. This school year had already started and, no matter how talented an applicant showed themselves to be, it was highly unlikely for them to accept him so late into the year. However, since you will undoubtedly be getting offered a scholarship, we could spend the next year traveling around and teaching you about the world outside of the elemental nations. Naruto's eyes glowed with excitement. Yeah, he said excitedly. Let me grab some things and I can meet you at the West Gate. The group agreed with the plan and parted ways. Urza and an excited Naruto were actually running to the Namikaze estate. Urza was giggling to herself since she had never seen this side of her young master before. It was refreshing to see him act his age rather than act like an adult. They burst through the front door, went to his room, packed their belongings in a backpack, and, once they had finished packing, were ready to leave. However, Naruto had another idea. Probably not the best one he'd ever had, but he couldn't leave without saying something to his parents. So, he began to write a note. When he finished, he had placed it on the desk of the now Spartan room before heading out to the West Gate where he would begin his journey into this new world. With his mana unlocked and a whole other world to explore, Naruto Uzumaki had decided that he would spread his wings and learn to fly on his own. No, he thought to himself. As long as I have Urza by my side and new friends wait for me over the horizon, I'll never be alone. Never again. And with those final thoughts, he walked out the open gate, taking his first step on a journey of a lifetime. Over the span of their journey, Naruto could honestly say that he had never been more proud of his decision to leave Konoha than he was now. Because he wasn't officially a student, neither Geralt nor his apprentices were allowed to teach him magic or even how to control his mana. That, apparently, had been a rule the Vale Magical Academy had been forced to enforce after a rather dim teacher had found a young boy and began to teach him magic with very little supervision. The boy had begun to take a dark path after he had accidentally killed someone with a spell and discovered that he actually felt excited at the idea of murdering others, namely those who had wronged him. Needless to say, the boy had been slain himself after he had been caught by none other than the legendary Widow Slayer. Over their journey, he had read up on the history according to those outside of the elemental nations, known to very few outsiders as the Hidden Continent. While there were many similarities, there were also quite a few discrepancies. Namely where Tsukubi had mysteriously vanished after he and the fabled Sage of Six Paths had waged war over the creation of Pokegirls, resulting in the deaths of millions of people compared to the belief that Tsukubi had been killed for his crimes against humanity. He had also become interested in the stories about the heroes and villains that plagued them once upon a time. His favorite, so far, was the legend of the Widow Slayer. Naruto had visited a hospital along the way that performed a blood test to check him for any blood gifts and curses he might have. As it turned out, he had been born with many blood gifts, but also a good deal of curses. Some of which weren't even listed, yet mysteriously had a name. Vulpine Aura, he guessed, was because of Yasaka, as was Bound Soul Curse and Sealed Mind Gift. In spite of youthful vigor being listed normally as a gift, for him, it was more of a curse since he was told his appearance would be that of a 10 to 12-year-old boy for the rest of his life, which was far longer than that of most people because of his Uzumaki longevity. And with the horse-hung gift, his length would be, at the largest, 5 inches long. Average for most, but definitely long for someone with his body type. After he got the results, he placed them in his pocket, determined to find out how they worked or how they would affect him as a tamer, mage. After spending the first month in the elemental nations, Geralt had gotten word that the headmistress of Vale Magical Academy had placed an offer on the table. While he wouldn't be accepted that year as a student, he would be allowed to live in the dorms until the next school year began. For that to happen, however, he would need to meet with the headmistress of the academy in person. So what do you think, Naruto? Geralt asked the youth. Do you wish to meet Headmistress Jessica Albert or will you travel with us for the rest of the time between now and the beginning of the school year? Naruto bit his lip. This was a wonderful chance, just to be able to have somewhere to live rather than traveling around the elemental nations and possibly even other continents before joining the VMA next year in August. But, if he didn't make a good impression, then he could, for all of his potential, be refused the chance to join and essentially be forced to learn magic on his own or from the very rare magic-type Pokegirl he may or may not run into. I don't seem to have much choice, Naruto admitted. While he was sure he could sleep in a tent for a year, He would miss the creature comforts he had in Konoha. Like warm baths and a comfortable bed. I need this opportunity, and letting it pass me by is something I would likely regret. To Geralt, it was clear the boy was nervous about the encounter. And why shouldn't he be? This single meeting could determine if he joined the academy or not. In the elder mage's opinion, Naruto had too much potential to not be allowed to join. Not only that, but the boy seemed to wish to use his power to help others rather than go the way of the dark mage or rogue mage who were usually in it for themselves. If his meeting went well, he would be allowed to stay in the dorms and might get a scholarship or two out of it. If the meeting didn't go as well as he and the boy hoped, either one of two things could happen. 1. Naruto would have to continue traveling around until the school year started. 2. If she really didn't like him, she could simply refuse to admit him into the school regardless of his potential. Sure, there were several people who were capable of learning magic from a magic-type Pokegirl, and Naruto, according to his blood test, was one such individual. However, the lack of many magic-type Pokegirls is the problem. Sure, if one were lucky enough, they could run into one, but that required the luck of an army of Lady Lucks simply to get her to agree to train him in the art of magic and mana manipulation. Very well, Geralt said with a relenting sigh. I'll inform her of your decision. With luck, her schedule will be open to see you within the month. After all, she still has many duties to attend to as the headmistress of the Vale Magical Academy. In the meantime, why don't we start heading toward the method of transportation that will take us to Vale Magical Academy? It's almost a week's journey alone, but to get the receiving end of it working could take days from when the headmistress has set a date to see you. It will also provide my colleagues and I ample opportunity to observe how Pokegirls in your league differ from those of the other leagues in the wilderness. Well, Naruto started. The forest surrounding Konoha is watched over by the Elf Queen belonging to the first Hokage and her monarchy of elf evolutions. Geralt and his assistants perked up, eager to hear the story of such a long-lived Pokegirl. It's actually customary for the new Hokage, upon being elected, to speak with the Elf Queen. If she approves of the choice, she will help protect Konoha as a sort of first line of defense, allowing the Hokage to easily mobilize the ninjas and ninja tamers to battle-ready status to combat the threat. And what if the Elf Queen does not approve of the chosen successor? Marcus asked eagerly. Naruto winced. It's only happened once, to my knowledge, and I wasn't alive when it happened, he said. According to Grandpa Sarutobi, the former third Hokage, his prized student, Orochimaru, had been offered the position. He accepted, but when he went to meet the Elf Queen, she said that under his leadership, Konoha would fall to ruin. So, he decided not to follow through and continued on until the current fourth Hokage made a name for himself and was approved of by the Elf Queen. Orochimaru had been conducting experiments on Konoha's low-class citizens, those who had lost everything and wandered the streets for a job or even a scrap of food, or those who were looked down upon for their choice in profession, like those in the red light district. When it looked like he was about to be discovered, he stumbled across a Pokegirl. He experimented on her, tortured her. Nobody knows how long, but when he had finally had enough with Konoha, he unleashed a terrible creature upon Konoha while making his escape. What did he unleash? Alexander asked, almost too afraid to ask. An anima, Naruto said coldly, causing the trio to flinch. Anything they found in his labs before they completely burned to the ground were classified under such heavy lock, key, and seal that no single ninja could hope to unlock it to use against them or the world, like Orochimaru had proven fully willing and capable of doing again. Naruto looked away as Urza rubbed his shoulders. Grandpa said that, as tamers, it was their duty to put the anima out of its misery. After killing about 100 ninjas, they finally killed her and put her to rest. The only reason I even know about it is because people who were around tell the story to try and curb anyone who would consider hurting a Pokegirl to the point that they became a dark evolution. What makes things even more serious is that sometime after, the other 4 great shinobi villages learned about Orochimaru's creation of an anima, and in a unanimous decision, something that never happens because of the tensions between the 5 great shinobi villages, it was decided that anyone who is involved with or had knowledge of someone who created a dark evolution would be branded a traitor of the elemental nations and would never be willingly allowed access to a Pokegirl for the rest of their lives. I see, Geralt hummed to himself, though it was clear that he agreed with the drastic measure after the first recorded anima had been unleashed in the elemental nations. Still, how do they regulate or keep an eye on such punishments? It must get difficult to keep track of so many individuals. Naruto nodded in response. It is, but not for the reason you are thinking, he added. You see, anyone caught in possession of a dark evolution would have been targeted by this law when it was first implemented, but those who have obtained their dark evolution Pokegirls from a trade, which is recorded on an official log, or those who evolve into dark evolutions from a trade, have been allowed to keep the Pokegirl without being branded. The brand is more of a complex seal that only glows under a unique type of light that all gate guards or local law enforcement are required by supreme law to carry. If anyone approaches them with a mark, they can scan it to discover the list of towns they passed through, the village or town where they were apprehended, what dark evolution they created, and those who she associated with after they got arrested. They must have them be escorted by a single, off-duty officer or a small group of chunin or higher-level ninjas so that they cannot be allowed to interact with any Pokegirls aside from those who actively work in a business they visit. The downside comes with the inherent shadowy natures of a ninja village, he said. Even civilians and nobles had begun to unknowingly adopt a more paranoid outlook when it comes to things they call their own. This even goes into Pokegirls. Unless proof of a dark evolution in their possession is given to a tamer, shinobi tamer, or other law enforcement official, they can't do anything. This makes it harder to target real wrongdoers over innocent individuals who simply were unfortunate enough to run into a dark evolution. Naruto released a frustrated sigh. This one noble, Lady Shijimi. She and her husband are nice enough, but their son is a bastard. He had a pet angel, but she fled his custody while the family slept. Everyone knew he abused her, but without proof, they couldn't look into it. I have no doubt that her son caused a dark evolution and his parents, or, at the very least, his mother knows about it. But without concrete proof, nobody can investigate, and nobody will investigate until either the Pokegirl dies and someone catches one of her servants or a member of her family dumping the body, or until another, far more violent dark evolution evolves from it, bringing everyone's eyes on them. At least the angel fled to freedom, Marcus remarked, getting nods from everyone else. I feel sorry for any other Pokegirls that family owns. To be stuck with such abusive tamers. Marcus unknowingly reached for the single Pokeball on his belt, stroking it gently with his thumb. Alexander did something similar, but his Pokeball was on a chain attached to his waist like a pocket watch. Naruto surmised that it was for quick, subtle access to his Pokegirl should something unfortunate happen. After 6 hours of walking, Naruto telling stories he had heard around the village while the trio of older mages listened carefully, they managed to reach a rather large town with a sign that read, "Welcome to Bangtown." They were approached by a friendly, blue-haired woman wearing a police uniform and a Pokegirl Naruto recognized as a Growly. She held a small, handheld device and scanned the backs of their hands. When she didn't see anything strange, she wished them safe travels and resumed her post at the gate with her Growly partner. Huh, Alexander said as he did a double take at the blue-haired woman. I didn't know you had Officer Jenny Pokegirls here. Considering how similar to the Edo League's culture you are, I almost expected a samurai or a kunoichi. Understandable, Geralt said. You once lived in Edo, didn't you? It must be surreal being in the elemental nations, Alexander. Alexander blushed at being caught before acknowledging Master Geralt. Yes, he said, it is, but the level of architecture, while similar, appears far more friendly to nature. Thanks to the widespread use of chakra and discovering so many ways to use it to make life easier, we've never needed to improve our level of technology past what we have now, Naruto said with a shrug of his shoulders. What technology we have available has suited us for hundreds of years, at the very least. Sure, we upgrade and improve our technology when we discover something deemed useful, but if we can use chakra to do it, we don't need technology to do it for us lest we grow lazy and weak. With 4 incredibly powerful nations possibly looking at us as a threat, we need to be as powerful as we can should war break out between any of the nations. Is the sense of peace here really that fragile? Marcus asked. Sadly, it is, called Geralt. There are very few instances of the 5 nations cooperating with one another outside of threats that affect everyone's well-being. Such as that anime that was released in Konoha. War is always a possibility, regardless of how far they have come together because of Pokegirls. Marcus and Alexander nodded sadly. It didn't take long for the group to find themselves an inn and paid for 2 rooms. Naruto would have his own room with Urza while the trio of mages shared a room. Naturally, they did this because Urza, being a bunny girl who was rather attached to her young master, Naruto, had an extremely high libido and would ask Naruto to tame her at least once every 3 days or so, if not more often, which was about how long it took them to reach a new town. Naruto, however, spotted a small Pokemart off to the side, likely for tamers passing through since the town was a good distance from Konoha. "Give me a minute," he said to his companions. "I've got to get a few things." Naruto walked through the door alone, setting off a chime that was familiar within Konoha. A burly man stood at the register with a brilliant smile on his face. "Hello, young man. How can I help you?" he asked excitedly, making Naruto wonder if many tamers even came through the store. Naruto pulled out his wallet, making sure to count the money he had left. He spent a good bit of his saved-up allowance on Urza's outfits and didn't have much left. However, he knew that being on a journey like this one, he might run into a feral Pokegirl and he wanted to be ready for when that happened. He looked around at the items the store sold as well as how much they would cost. "I'd like to buy a basic Tamer's pack," he said firmly. It consisted of 6 Pokeballs, a backpack with 6 slots, 2 potions, an antidote, a paralyze heal, an awakening, and a burn heal. Naruto then noticed something he thought was really cool. It was a set of stickers. "What's with those stickers?" The man laughed jovially. "Those, my boy, are called seals," he said proudly. "It's becoming all the rage with young tamers and Pokegirl coordinators. Stick one on a Pokeball and when you call out your Pokegirl, a really cool effect occurs. Mostly for show or for identifying your Pokegirls in the event that they are stolen and recovered. But these look like chess pieces," Naruto mentioned. The man sighed. "Yeah," he said. "The popular ones are hearts, stars, and other shapes and those sell out like hotcakes at a lumberjack convention. Unfortunately, the chess seals aren't as popular. They consist of a queen, 2 bishops, 2 knights, 2 rooks, and 8 pawns. The reason being that the tamer is the king and her Pokegirls are more like the pieces of her set. But kids today want flashy, cute seals, so these mostly sit around." Naruto thought to himself about the chess seals. They were really cool, contrary to what the owner or any customers believed. And it also helped to designate a hierarchy for tamers with larger harems. The queen would almost be guaranteed to be his alpha while the beta could be any one of the other royal pieces. Pawns would be even more interesting since, in the actual game, they could be promoted to any of the royal pieces. Therefore, a pawn would need to be well-rounded as far as their skills. Knights could travel the board fast, being able to easily cross a wall of pawns if positioned correctly. Rooks were akin to tanks. Powerful and durable, charging into the fray and capturing any piece that was in front of it. Bishops were similar to spellcasters. Fragile in hand-to-hand combat, but more than capable of filling out a support role. The queen was the most powerful of all. She had the movement of the knight, the durability of a rook, and the capability of supporting other pieces on the battlefield like a bishop. "Put those chess seals in with the pack," Naruto said. "They could be useful." The owner eagerly added the unwanted seals into the backpack and placed it on the counter. "That's gonna be 3,500 Ryu. Kid." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "But the seals cost 1,200 Ryu and the pack alone cost 3,500. He said as he had readied himself to pay 4,700 Ryu for the entire purchase. "Those seals weren't going to sell and I'd rather give them to you since you seem so interested in them," the owner said happily. "Besides, I can see how much you like them. Consider it a gift for the start of your journey. I'll even throw in a copy of Taming for Dummies since you're so young and planning on starting your journey as a tamer." Naruto paid the man the 3,500 Ryu, took his purchase, and went back to the hotel where Geralt, his companions, and he would be staying. He proceeded to read Taming for Dummies until he fell asleep. The next day, they set out for a town by the name of Dreyfus Town. It was out of the way of many other towns, but Geralt said that he had gotten word from the headmistress that their transportation back to VMA would be located there. However, within the first couple of hours into their journey, they had been forced to make camp due to a storm that was passing over them. It was just to the north of them, the direction they were taking to get to Dreyfus Town. Winds howled through the trees and the grass and leaves swayed under the assault of the powerful gusts. While the mages slept, Naruto and Urza found themselves surprisingly awake. Naruto, oddly enough, loved storms. Mostly wind storms, but on occasion would enjoy the crashing rain and booming thunder that came with storms. It was relaxing to him. The chaos outside would throw the order of civilization into hysteria as they struggled to escape the coming torrent dry and safe. Naruto jabbed a thick branch into the fire as it grew with the help of the powerful winds, but never to a dangerous size that he felt uncomfortable. He sat on Urza's lap, his head gently resting on her ass as she sighed in contentment. However, with the fire burning hotter and higher, the fuel was burning quicker. Eventually, the fire had begun to die. Naruto stood up, brushing the imaginary dirt off of his burnt orange shirt and blue jeans, setting his poking stick aside for a moment. "Come on, Urza-chan," he said somewhat solemnly. "Let's get some firewood." Urza nodded before walking alongside Naruto. The two proceeded to pick up a few branches, the larger ones being carried by Urza. Once they gathered enough firewood, they proceeded to turn around and head back to camp when they were startled by a woman with jet black hair draping down her back, golden eyes with vertically slit pupils and sharp claws on her hands. She stood easily at around 5.5 feet tall. She had pale skin, though not quite sickly pale. It was actually a rather attractive pale shade. She was completely nude with a wild look in her eyes. Naruto's eyes roamed the girl up and down, taking in her form. Her S were small, barely being able to qualify as B-cup, but her body had a lithe quality to it with an amazing-looking butt. "Master," Urza said quietly. Naruto nodded. "I know," he replied. "She's gone feral." He glanced over to her. "I think it's time we got some combat experience, Urza. I want you to battle her." "Bu, but..." She looked down to see him smiling softly at her and her heart skipped a beat. "Don't worry about hurting her or getting hurt yourself. I bought some supplies earlier using what I had left after shopping for your outfits. Just do your best, okay?" She was still hesitant, but nodded in acknowledgement. She stepped forward and a fierce look entered her eyes. It was her duty to protect Naruto, and this was a good place to show him how deep her dedication to him went. Her eyes lit up. If she beat this feral Pokegirl, Naruto might reward her with another taming. Now she had to win. The Pokegirl in front of them must have noticed the battle-ready bunny girl and snarled before lunging toward her with a claw ready to slash at them. Urza, unprepared for the attack, began to back up before accidentally tripping on a tree root, causing her to fall on her back and allowing the claw to swipe harmlessly overhead. "Use kick," Naruto ordered, already having an idea on Urza's basic attacks from reading the Taming for Dummies book. Urza's gaze hardened again as her legs cocked back, the muscles within becoming like a spring and storing energy before she planted a powerful kick to the strange Pokegirl's midsection, sending her flying into a tree. When she made impact, the tree shook from the remarkable strength within the bunny girl's legs. She got back up as if she hadn't taken the blow, though she was shaken up a bit. Urza got back up as well, dusting herself off from her small fall. The feral Pokegirl seemed to dash into the trees, slashing away at them with her claws. Naruto narrowed his eyes, wondering what she was doing. Urza and this Pokegirl seemed to have similar speeds, though Urza appeared to be slightly faster due to her powerful legs, allowing her to move greater distances with as much effort as a human would exert going half that distance. However, he and Urza both heard the groaning of wood and knew what was happening. Behind them, a tree had begun falling toward them. It would crush them with ease, and Urza's legs weren't powerful enough to divert the tree's path. She wrapped him up in her arms and darted to the side several yards away before letting him back down. The tree crashed down to the earth with a thunderous smash, creating a deep indentation in the ground beneath it. The feral Pokegirl could be seen standing on top of it, looking at them condescendingly before snorting at her failed attempt. "Let's go on the offense, Urza," Naruto replied firmly. She nodded. "Use leap." Urza readied her legs and shot into the night sky like a rocket. Her silhouette seemed to etch itself onto the moon. As she fell back to earth and toward her opponent, Naruto thought of something. "Now use tackle." Urza's foot lit up with a glowing aura as she rocketed toward the feral Pokegirl. However, before she impacted her target, the Pokegirl jumped backwards, allowing her foot to crash into the tree, pulverizing it due to the speed and power behind the attack, creating a plume of smoke and wood pulp. Now double kick. From the dust a foot shot out and caught her opponent on the chest, but before she could be shot off, her other foot joined it, increasing the power and sending her crashing through the forest. The strange Pokegirl rolled across the dirt after her body pierced through 3 trees. She got back up, anger the most evident emotion on her face at the moment. The dust cleared from Urza's impact and it was clear that missing her target had done some damage to her. She was a bit bruised, but nothing major like cuts could be seen. She was breathing heavily, the steely look in her eyes glowing with determination. However, nobody expected what was about to happen next. Urza's body began to glow with a brilliant light. Her S seemed to lose a cup size or two, though her outfit did reshape itself to fit her size. No height was gained, but she did lose all of her animal features. When the light vanished, Naruto wondered what had just happened. She evolved, Naruto-kun, came the familiar voice of Yasaka. But into what? He asked mentally. An ingenue, she replied. They are more human in appearance than most Pokegirls. Unless someone used their Pokédex to identify her, most would simply think she was a regular human. Typically, for a bunny girl to evolve into one, it requires a lot of stress on their part. Being a non-combat-oriented Pokegirl entering into a fight with a feral Daimon, it's not surprising that she evolved. Battles are more than stressful enough to make one evolve. However, she gains just as much as she loses by evolving. She has a wider variety of attacks available to her as well as increased strength, durability, and loses her clumsiness, but she loses a lot of her speed, her enhanced hearing, and her dumb luck. So that's a Daimon, Naruto whispered to himself. Any info on an ingenue's attack set, Yasaka? I never bothered fighting such weak Pokegirls, even as a kid, Yasaka scoffed telepathically. She is capable of fighting as a human, so you should have some idea as to what she's capable of already. Naruto furrowed his brow in frustration before an idea hit him. Urza, use glare, he shouted. Urza nodded and leveled a terrifying glare at her opponent. To the Daimon, Urza looked as if she had grown a great deal and was leveling a petrifying glare at her, causing her to tremble in fear. Naruto would admit that when his mother gave him that glare of hers when he was younger and trying to get attention from his parents, she was absolutely terrifying. It's what made him think to tell Urza to glare at the Daimon. Now growl followed by punch. Urza let out a soul-shaking growl as she charged toward her petrified opponent and delivered a heavy right hook to her face. However, instead of stopping there, she continued to rain down punches and kicks onto her opponent, mercilessly pummeling her without giving her a chance to defend or retaliate. That's enough, Urza, he said, causing her to snap out of her trance-like state and look at him curiously. Naruto pulled out a Pokeball from his backpack and she knew what was about to happen, moving back by his side with a satisfied smile on her lips. He tossed the Pokeball at the downed and weakened Daimon. It connected and a crimson beam shot toward her before engulfing her and going back to the ball. Bang, bang, bang. The ball stopped shaking on the ground and Naruto could barely keep his excitement in check. He actually did it. He captured his first feral Pokegirl. He ran over to the Pokeball and plucked it from the ground, mentally celebrating this monumental accomplishment. Naruto paused his celebration when he heard clapping come from toward the camp. He and Urza both looked over and saw Geralt, Marcus, and Alexander clapping at his first captured Pokegirl. He blushed to himself, somewhat relishing in their attention before reminding himself that he needed to bring his new addition to a poke center, get her healed up, tame her, and name her. Then, after taming the Daimon he caught, he needed to tame Urza as a reward for evolving and doing so well in her first battle. Good job, my boy, Geralt said proudly. You and Urza did really well for your first Pokegirl battle. I'm glad you managed to handle it on your own. Naruto looked at them flatly. How long have you three been watching? He asked. Ever since that tree fell, Marcus admitted shyly. We woke up when we heard it crash and decided to check up on you. If you had been in any trouble, we would have taken control of the situation, but Master Geralt said it would be a good experience for you and to see how well you would do. Admittedly, when I had my first Pokegirl battle, I froze up and we lost to a Growly and her tamer. If you had been carrying a Pokédex, you would have likely been able to completely control the battle, Alexander said, pulling out his own Pokédex. Thankfully, you'll be given one when your application to VMA is solidified, but still, it was inspiring watching you battle that Daimon. Agreed, Geralt said. You have good battle instincts already. Probably from living in Konoha most of your life and being surrounded by ninjas and tamers alike. But that was a feral Pokegirl. In a real battle where you are fighting an opponent and her tamer capable of pulling together a strategy, you might not have been so lucky. Still, I think a daimon is a good starting addition to your harem. While they may be aggressive, they are capable of thinking up impressive tactics. If you can teach her how to simplify her tactics, making them more efficient in the long run, they can be a very valuable asset to any tamer. Naruto nodded in agreement. He was still new to being a tamer, and if the daimon he fought had been tame, it was likely he wouldn't have been able to win. But this was a good learning experience for him and Urza both. Speaking of, Urza was standing off to the side, her hands casually groping at her ass with a furrowed brow. They weren't as sensitive as they had been when she was a bunny girl, which mildly irritated her. She genuinely enjoyed it when Naruto could, if he had been so inclined, get her off by playing with her ass alone. The second thing she was mildly upset with was the reduction in her cup size. Sure, she knew that when some Pokegirls evolved, they usually increased or decreased in cup size by at most one size. She went from a G cup to an E cup. She dropped by 2 whole sizes. 2. And to a woman who was proud of the mounds of flesh and how attractive they were to her young master, it was a blow to her ego and pride. She knew Naruto wouldn't mind since her S were still larger than the average human and his fetish extended to both ends of the spectrum. She would miss the extra girth and bounce that both she and Naruto enjoyed during. "Young master," she whined, catching his attention. She walked over to him, her head bowed low. "What's wrong, Urza-chan?" he asked worriedly. Urza sighed. "What do you think of my boobs since I've evolved?" she asked anxiously. Naruto cocked his head to the side before gently poking the object of inquiry with his finger. He did this a couple of times, but she didn't react. "They aren't as sensitive as they used to be," he said observantly. "Smaller, firmer, but they still have a bit of bounce to them." He shrugged his shoulders. "I still love them. Then again, I love boobs of any size, so it doesn't bother me if they get smaller or bigger. It just means I can't get you off by playing with them as often as I used to. But I liked them when they were bigger," she whined. "You could sleep on them all day long and I like how sensitive they were." Naruto hopped up and bopped Urza on the crown of her head. "Ow, why do you do that, young master?" "Because I love you for you," he said, blushing as he turned away from her. "Your big boobs were just a bonus. Now stop being silly and let's get to the next town. I need to tame the newest addition to our growing family. And after evolving and winning your first fight, I'll tame you like there's no tomorrow after I tame Daimon-chan." Urza smiled, her brown eyes shining in joy at his confession. Then her cheeks glowed crimson at the promised taming reward. Mentally, she was doing a victory dance, but retained her happy demeanor on the outside. "So, what do you plan on naming her?" she asked curiously. Naruto paused his train of thought before shrugging to himself. "Dunno. Maybe I'll come up with something while I'm taming her," he replied casually. "Then I suggest we head back to Bangtown," Geralt said. "My Dracare told me that the storm ahead of us isn't going to let up for at least the next few days." Naruto frowned. He had been hoping to make it to the next town, which according to the map was called Spunky Town, within the next couple of days so that he could meet up with the headmistress of VMA as soon as possible. With how bad this storm was beginning to sound, it would put off their journey by a week at best. While better than the alternative of having to take the long way around the storm and being put off by possibly months if not longer. 2 hours later, the group of 4 had returned to Bangtown. While Geralt, Alexander, and Marcus had gone to rent a few rooms at the local inn, Naruto had gone to visit the Poke Center. At the front desk, he spotted a pink-haired woman standing at around 5.5 feet tall with green eyes and a rather average bust. "Welcome to the Poke Center," she said with a brilliant smile on her lips. "How can I be of service?" Naruto pulled out Urza's Pokeball and the Pokeball of his latest Pokegirl and set them on the table. "My Pokegirl, Urza, and I ran into a feral daimon," he said monotonously. "We managed to capture her, but I wanted to make sure neither of them were badly hurt before I tamed my new daimon." "I understand," she said before taking the Pokeballs. "I'll run a simple diagnostic on them both. I'll take care of them both. Would you like to use one of the taming rooms upstairs when your Pokegirls are fully healed?" "What can I possibly learn from doing this, Naruto-sama?" asked Albedo as she faced off against Urza, who stood across from her. For the last 3 days, the storm rampaged across their path to Dreyfus Town. It had been so bad that the mayor of Bangtown had decided that the path to Dreyfus Town would be shut down until the weather cleared. After Naruto told the nurse Joy of his misfortune of being forced to return to Bangtown after they barely avoided the storm that blocked the way to Dreyfus Town, she was kind enough to allow Naruto and his Pokegirls to stay in the room they had been in until the storm passed. So, for the last 3 days, Naruto had been spending his time wisely between reading Taming for Dummies, actually taming his Pokegirls twice a day, and learning more about his Pokegirls and their abilities by researching Daimons and Ingenues on the Pokeweb. With a solid understanding of their capabilities under his belt, he wanted to work on his ability to issue commands, his ability to plan out his battles, and his teamwork with Urza and Albedo both individually and as combat partners. Because if I am to become a good tamer, I need to learn how to strategize in battle and issue clear commands to my Pokegirls, Albedo-chan, he said neutrally. If I can't issue commands clearly, it will cause confusion and our opponents will have an advantage over us. And without a proper strategy, against any foe, we would likely fail. Admittedly, a strategy is only as good as the information that we have available to us. But my strategies are flawless, Albedo said proudly. With them, we will bring you one step closer to victory against your enemies, Naruto-sama. Naruto smiled at the confidence Albedo exuded. But there was a difference between confidence and arrogance. And right now, Albedo was growing arrogant. It was time for a lesson to be learned. Okay, he replied. Okay, Naruto-sama, she asked curiously. He smiled at her, causing her cheeks to become dusted with a light pink blush. If you are so confident in your ability to strategize, why don't we put your ability to the test, he said. During this first battle, I won't give you any instruction. I'll just stand here and watch you battle Urza-chan. If you can beat her, then I will default to your judgment when I make strategies. If you don't beat her, then we'll do things the other way. I'll command Urza-chan and use my own strategy. If she manages to beat you with me commanding her, you will accept my orders without question and without hesitation. However, why don't we put a bit more on the line? If you can beat Urza without me saying a single word using your ability to strategize for the next 5 days, whenever you want, unless I'm taming Urza-chan, I will tame you whenever, wherever, and however you please. Her golden eyes lit up like a star as a perverted smile danced upon her lips. However, if you lose to Urza-chan in both battles, I will punish you for the next 5 days. This punishment will be determined by me and me alone. I will punish you 3 times a day for the next 5 days and you will submit to the punishments whenever I call with complete and utter obedience. Do we have a deal? Albedo's eyes were now torn between fear of what punishment Naruto-sama could imagine and what she could do with 5 days of unregulated taming. She was confident in her plans and tactics, but would she risk getting punished 3 times a day for 5 days should she lose to prove to her beloved master that she had flawless tactics and strategies? It was a difficult choice. I'll do it, she said confidently. All she had to do was win without him issuing a single command and he would tame her whenever she wanted, wherever she asked for it. And she already had many ideas of how she wanted to take him. She doubted she could convince him to tame her in public, as hot and why as that would be. And she was not about to allow some unworthy pigs to lay eyes on her when she was naked in all of her beauty and glory. That was an honor strictly reserved for Naruto-sama. And, in the event that she lost the first match, she just had to make sure she didn't lose the second match and she wouldn't get punished. Alright then, he said simply. On my mark, you will spar. The rules for this are simple. No lethal attacks. You have the full use of any and all techniques at your disposal so long as you do not go for the kill. Victory is called when one of you can no longer fight or if you submit to your opponent. If you fail to submit and the battle is getting too serious or out of control, I will stop the match and nobody wins. Do you understand? Yes, Naruto-sama, Albedo called before steeling herself, confident in the plan she made. Of course, young master, Urza replied happily. She knew why Naruto was really doing this. She was not a combat-ready Pokegirl and she needed the experience that came from sparring against a serious opponent. She had a good understanding of what attacks she knew, which was a mix of both attacks and battle attacks. She wouldn't be taking orders from Naruto, so she had to develop her battle instincts during this first match. This was meant to be a learning experience for both her and Albedo. He wasn't expecting her to win or lose. He expected her to learn the basics of understanding her natural battle instincts, from which she could grow and learn to be even stronger so that when they entered into a battle, when he commanded her, she would be able to use her battle instincts and she would improve her skill and power, becoming stronger and more useful to him in the long run. Then let the match begin. Bring it on, bitch, Urza called with a glare. I beat your ass once and I'll do it again. She stood there waiting for an attack. Actually, I'll be generous since this probably won't happen again. I'll give you a free shot. Hit me with your best shot, you infernal whore. Albedo's golden eye twitched in barely concealed anger. Don't fall for it, Albedoheim, she mentally told herself. Stick to the plan and we'll show that bitch who the boss really is. She shot off toward Urza, her fear aura in full effect as her claws glowed. Urza smirked as she stood perfectly still. Just as Albedo approached her, Urza grinned, cocking her fist back when Albedo was in range. Psyche. The next thing Albedo knew, she felt a stinging sensation in her jaw and her body felt weightless. She fell to the ground, her body skipping like a stone across a lake before finally landing in front of Naruto, who was looking on with a somewhat bored look in his eyes. Since Urza was a bunny girl before, he guessed that her eyes had to get used to seeing things at high speeds, and because of this, she was able to keep up with Albedo's enhanced speed, giving her a chance to land the first hit. Albedo got back up with an enraged look in her eye, but she wasn't at the breaking point yet. She was still focused on her plan to win the battle. Even if I'm faster than her, she was still able to track my movements and hit me, she thought in disgust for even being hit. That just alters the plan slightly. I know I can still beat her. She ran back toward Urza, but when she got within 5 feet of her, she ducked under the coming blow and landed a powerful fury swipe to her torso. However, she continued to push her, using her speed and the flurry of blows to push Urza until her back was firmly against a tree. Urza had managed to block a few of the swipes, but a good few still landed. When she felt he back hit the tree, she was surprised to find herself doubled over in pain with Albedo's fist in her stomach. It was a sucker punch from out of nowhere. However, when the fist didn't leave her stomach, she understood what was happening. Her strength was slowly fading. She bit her lip and begins to stand back up straight before delivering a powerful backhand to Albedo's cheek. Her concentration was lost as she was stunned by the weak attack. Did you just bitch slap me? She demanded in anger. Her aggression was rising and with it, so was her rage. First, the cutting reminder that she was beaten when she was feral. Now she just up and bitch slapped her. I'm gonna kill you, bitch. Not a chance, Urza snapped, leveling a powerful glare at Albedo, who wilted slightly under the glare. Urza then cocked back her fist and delivered a powerful punch. To Albedo's eyes widened as a pain unlike any other coursed through her body. She was practically paralyzed with pain at the unexpected attack on her ass. This allowed Urza time to back away and remove her outfit, revealing everything to her young master and Albedo. She used the chance to play with herself, groping her left with one hand while fingering herself with the other. However, instead of bringing herself to climax, she took her moist fingers and sucked on them. She could feel her energy get renewed and her strength returned even stronger than ever. Love, in affection, worked best with a partner pokegirl or her tamer. While still effective, it lost much of its potency when used one herself. Still, the brief recovery was more than enough as she ran toward Albedo, having decided not to pass up an opportunity to land a blow against her opponent to put on her clothes. As deep into the forest around Bangtown as they were, it was unlikely that anyone would see them. She was not ashamed of her body since she knew that it belonged to Naruto and him alone. If he ordered her to completely forego wearing clothes for the rest of her life, she would happily do so, knowing that by doing so it would make him happy. As she raced toward the still frozen Albedo, her fists began to glow as she rained down punch after powerful punch on the girl, causing her to scream in agony. When Albedo was on her back on the ground, Urza did not stop in her assault as she rained down more blows against her opponent. That's enough, Naruto called, causing Urza to stop her assault and stand back up before sauntering over to him. You performed well, Urza-chan. He walked over to Albedo, who seemed to have finally overcome her pain and was breathing heavily. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. She lost. Again. Against the person she called her rival in love, she failed to keep her promise to her beloved. Albedo-chan, he whispered in her ear as she sat up from the dirt. He wrapped his arms around her. I know it hurts. I never want to see either of you get hurt like this. Do you know why you lost? She turned to him, her eyes still wet with fresh tears. Because I'm weak, she spat at him. No, he said soothingly, using his hand to brush away her tears and giving her a warm smile. Because you wanted to do things on your own. You had a plan and you refused to deviate from it. When you used Sucker Punch on Urza-chan when she couldn't avoid it, then followed up with Energy Drain, it was a good tactic. It was brilliant, but you know Energy Drain works best on sleeping opponents, yet your plan was to drain her of all of her energy and strength until she couldn't fight back. You gave her an opening to retaliate from and she took it. Instead of continuously draining her energy and strength, you should have used hit and run tactics. Press the advantage, and when you have the opportunity to use Energy Drain for even a few seconds at a time, that slowly adds up. If it looks like your opponent is recovering, break away and wait for another opening. Albedo's cheeks burned crimson as she looked into Naruto's loving blue eyes. Nah, Naruto-sama, she muttered. Now, let's go visit the Poke Center before we start round 2, Naruto said excitedly. Urza had already gotten back into her flight armor, dusting it off from the dirt that it had accumulated. She had no doubt that if Albedo had used a full-powered Fury Swipe, her clothes might not have lasted long before needing to get repaired. Why was she imagining such erotic punishments, and why was she feeling so hot about many of the ones that flooded her imagination? The trip to the Poke Center was mildly uneventful. Albedo and Urza had taken some serious damage in their spar, but he was thankful that they didn't seem to be going at each other's throats all the time like he heard Nurse Joy often say about tamers with multiple Pokegirls who had developed a rivalry among themselves. When they were completely healed, they went back to the forest where they had been training earlier. Albedo had taken off her dress entirely, saying that she didn't want to ruin it if it ever tore because of their spar, since it was a gift from Naruto. Even if Urza paid for it. Are you ready, Albedo-chan? He asked her, to which she replied with a nod. She would take Naruto's advice under advisement. If things were going poorly for her, she would admit that Naruto's strategy worked better than hers and, even if she won the match, would submit to her end of the deal. If she could win using her own tactics, however, it would prove that, while she could learn from him, she had the better strategies. Then let's start. Urza, use quick attack. As Urza shot off toward Albedo, Naruto couldn't help but wonder just how his family was reacting to his departure from Konoha. In Konoha, for the Namikaze family, things had been like a roller coaster over the last month. After Naruto had left and they, somewhat drunkenly, discussed the reasons why they were so protective of him, reasoned that Naruto should know about his disability and why he couldn't become a ninja. However, they had decided to leave him alone after he stormed off after Urza, not wishing to upset him any further. It was their hope that, after he calmed down and they explained the situation to him, he would understand their reasoning and agree with them. They also made it a point to schedule a blood test for him with Tsunade since he was ULI active with the former maid. If he turned out to have blood gifts, he would be allowed to capture, albeit reluctantly, the bunny girl, and join the Tamer Academy. Mito had been training harder and becoming stronger. Her disposition was somewhat stoic, but she did have moments where she softened up. Naruto had met a Calamity Jane and the two had hit it off, becoming best friends. Sadly, last week, a representative from Kumo had come and kidnapped Hinata Hyuga and Naruto. According to the Calamity Jane, she had come across the scene where the Kumo representative was about to rape Naruto, who had been awake and aware the entire time of what was about to happen, and shot the bastard twice, ensuring he had died. Since then the two heiresses had changed. Hinata Hyuga, the once shy and quivering girl, had become Anko Matarashi's apprentice. She became a sharp-tongued, domineering, and provocatively dressed teen. It was known by the Namikaze twins that Hinata had a huge crush on Naruto. When someone mentioned him before her kidnapping, she would blush and poke her fingers together. If someone insulted him afterwards, she usually beat the living hell out of them. Her father, Hiyashi Hyuga, considered this a significant improvement since her skills with the Byakugan and Gentle Fist, their clan's prized taijutsu style. Until she started to rebel against the Hyuga clan elders, who wished to force her to marry Sasuke Uchiha, the heir of the Uchiha clan, stating that there was only one person she would marry willingly and the Uchiha heir was not that person. Naruto, due to the trauma, had developed an intense hatred of men. Aside from her father, who she still was forced to repress her instincts to get away from him whenever he hugged or kissed her, she usually beat down any guy who tried to hang out with her. Calamity Jane, due to being the one to save the two girls, had been allowed to become Naruto's first Pokegirl due to how close the two were after the terrifying event. Because of this, the two had been dedicating themselves to their ninja training. Naruto because she never wanted to feel so weak again, and Mito so she could protect her sister and big brother, her greatest role model. Kushina and Minato had become busy too. Kushina was dedicating almost all of her time to training the twins while Minato had confronted the third Raikage about the attempted abduction of his daughter and the Hyuga heiress under the guise of diplomacy. When the Raikage demanded the body of Hiashi Hyuga, under the belief that he had killed his diplomat, and the secrets to the Hiraishin, Minato had revealed that Hiashi and himself had been completely unaware of the kidnapping of his eldest daughter and that a wandering Pokegirl had been the one to kill his diplomat. The third Raikage knew that his plan had failed and tried to kill Minato. Luckily, a powerful Jonin and son of the third Raikage, had killed him instead. When asked what Minato would like in exchange for his father's deplorable actions against Konoha under the guise of peaceful negotiations, Minato only asked for a Pokegirl for his other daughter, Mito. It was decided that a Teslas was the best choice for her. When they got home, Mito welcomed Teslas as another member of the family. And while it did fill part of the hole in her heart, nothing could fill the part that missed her big brother. While her parents and Naruto failed to notice, she was able to easily pick up on the absence of her role model in the house. When she told her parents, they said he was upset with them over their decision to not allow him to become a ninja and they wanted him to take a moment to breathe and think things through before talking to him further. She named her Teslas after her big brother. Raito welcomed the fact that she was named after someone so important to her commander. It made her feel closer to Mito. One day, after not seeing her big brother around the estate for the last 2.5 weeks, she and Raito went up to his room to talk to him. However, when she went to knock on his door, it seemingly swung open on its own accord. She looked around and noticed that the room looked like it had never been lived in. Until she saw a piece of paper on the desk. She walked over to it and began to read. The more she read, the more tears threatened to fall from her eyes until she had become totally overwhelmed by the message that she fell to her knees. That was the day that an unfortunate discovery had been made. Naruto had left the village. When Mito finally collected herself, thanks largely to Raito, she showed her parents the note Naruto had left behind. They did not take the news well. Kushina was crying and fell into a deep depression. Minato was furious, though it was mostly at himself. He found out that Naruto had overheard him talking to Kushina about his disability and took it poorly. Far worse than he had imagined. However, a small part of him, a part that, if asked about, he would vehemently deny existed, was proud of his son. Instead of waiting, he took the initiative into his own hands and went out on a journey to become the man he knew he could become whether or not his parents would allow him to. He took the choice from them and went out to become a tamer. That did not mean that he had any intention of letting him leave. He planned on sending out a squad to retrieve his wayward son so that they could take the blood test and enter him into the Tamer Academy. He formed an odd-looking seal and a clone of him appeared. Go retrieve Kakashi, Kurenai Yuhi, and Sume Inuzuka, he told the clone. I have a mission for them. I'm going too, Kushina said, wiping away the tears from her eyes and a determined look on her face. What was he thinking when he left the village? Sage knows what could be happening to my baby boy. He could have run into a bunch of feral Pokegirls. Or worse, what if one of the other villages found out who he is and kidnapped him? Don't worry, dear, Minato replied soothingly. We have 2 of the best trackers and a magic-wielding kunoichi going with them. They are prepared for anything that might come at them. Kushina shook her head vehemently. No way. I'm going to find my baby boy and bring him home where he belongs, she stated. With or without your permission. Minato sighed in reluctance. Fine, he relented. You will be the team leader and you will go retrieve the heir to the Uzumaki family legacy. Okay? Kushina smiled weakly before giving her husband a peck on the lips. Thank you, honey, she said before heading up to their room to pack for the mission. Minato looked down at the, technically, older twin and Raito. Have you seen Naruko-chan lately? He asked. No, Daddy, she replied. I think she went to spend time with Hinata-chan and her other friends. Minato sighed in relief. Alright, he replied. As my heiresses and as my precious daughters, I would hate for anything else to happen to this family. You know I love you, right Heim? Mito nodded and gave a weak smile before wrapping her father in a warm hug. I love you too, Daddy, she replied. I love you, Mommy, Naruko-chan, and Naruto Onisama. Minato ruffled Mito's crimson hair. Then why don't you and Raito-chan go out back and train for a bit, he suggested, causing the two to excitedly run out back to the private training grounds for a friendly spar. Minato looked at the note sadly. I hope you're okay. Wherever you are, Naruto-kun. Bangtown. Warning. Lime ahead. Naruto Uzumaki sighed in relief as he sat in the mixed bath located just behind the poke center. He allowed the refreshing warm water soak into his body and ease away the tension in his muscles. He'd been training with Urza and Albedo all day long. Between exercising using techniques he'd picked up from watching his sisters train and coming up with strategies for individual battles and double battles, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Albedo had managed to beat Urza during the second spar, but admitted that she had been forced to use the strategy that Naruto had told her about after their first sparring session and stated that he won the bet. Urza had no hesitation when it came to following Naruto's orders. She trusted him completely with her well-being just as he trusted her with his life, and that combination made them a formidable team. She can understand just why she lost to her when she was feral and, truthfully, she desired that same ability to work in conjunction as a team. Urza was a strong ingenue and, when she evolved, trained, and fought other Pokegirls, would undoubtedly become even stronger with time. Naruto told her that when she completely trusted his judgment and he could trust her to follow his orders without hesitation, they would be just as strong as them. While she was still aggressive toward Urza, Naruto could sense a hint of the respect they had for one another. Naruto was not ready to forge an alpha bond with either of them, though he already realized, from what he read in the Taming for Dummies book, that he had a powerful delta bond with Urza. And it made sense from his perspective. They had been becoming closer ever since they first met. The delta bond showed just how much they loved one another and trusted one another. He had no idea just how strong their bond was until Yasaka had alerted him to a change in his mindscape. When he went there to visit Yasaka to find out what she meant, he immediately noticed the difference. His mindscape was a perfect copy of the Namikaze estates. Yasaka made a comment that it makes sense why his mindscape looks like that, since it felt like a prison to him and she is a prisoner within him. Whenever he opened a door in his mindscape, it usually led him to Yasaka's prison, which was a copy of his room. What changed was that one of the doors was labeled Urza's room. When he walked through the door, he was met with a completely naked Urza sitting on the bed with a shocked expression on her face. After a long explanation, the two realized that it was a representation of their delta bond and he could only meet her there when she was asleep. After a bit of experimentation, they realized that he could actually have with her in his mindscape, and his stamina was virtually limitless because it wasn't his real body. The way Yasaka later described what they did was more like reinforcing their delta bond. He couldn't technically tame her in his mindscape since she needed to be tamed physically to stave off her becoming feral. When he woke up that morning, Urza was super affectionate and had initiated a long taming session. It was discovered that she dreamed of their activities in his mindscape that night, and when she woke up, she could remember almost everything completely, which is why she initiated the taming session. When he explained to her what had happened, minus his conversation with Yasaka, she genuinely seemed happy to know that their bond was so strong already. Now, as he allowed the hot water to ease the tension in his body, his eyes closed as he allowed himself to relax, he could hear someone walk into the bath, the water slowly pushing away from their body as they slipped into the water. He could hear her breathe in quickly at the sudden change in temperature before she gently exhaled. He could feel the gentle ripples move closer to him before settling beside him on a rock bench that sat just below the water's surface. Naruto sighed before opening his eyes and giving the woman beside him a half-lidded stare. To most, the look would indicate some level of boredom, but the woman beside him knew that he was simply relaxed. Maybe too relaxed if his pink-tinted cheeks were any indication. "Can I help you with something, Albedo-chan?" he asked calmly. Albedo bowed her head as she lowered more of her body into the water until the water's surface rested just below her S, which he was currently eyeing. "Ever since you captured me and tamed me, we haven't gotten the chance to get to know one another outside of when we train or when you tame me," she said sadly. The way you act and speak when you spend time with Urza, sometimes I can't help but feel a bit jealous. Albedo-chan, Urza-chan and I have known one another for several years, Naruto told her. She used to work for my parents as a maid and I met her for the first time when I turned 7 and we've barely been separated from one another since. We literally met you last week. The depth of my relationship with Urza would naturally be greater than my relationship with you. But you are right. I love you just as much as I love Urza-chan, and if we want to make this relationship work and last the test of time, we should get to know one another beyond taming and training. So why don't you take a seat and ask me what you want to know? Albedo nodded and sauntered over before sitting on Naruto's lap. She could already feel his flaccid manhood with her womanhood and it always aroused her. As her thoughts drifted toward initiating a taming right here and now, she had to remind herself that this was to get closer to him both physically and emotionally. By doing this, she would gain his trust. As he began to trust her, he would likely begin to ask her for advice. And when he asked her for advice, she could guide him down the path she knew best suited him and he would become the greatest ruler known to mankind and Pokegirls alike. Why don't you tell me about your home, Naruto-sama? She asked curiously. Naruto took a deep breath. Before I started on my journey, I used to live in Konoha, he said sadly. Because of circumstances beyond my control, I couldn't use chakra and my parents refused to allow me to join the ninja academy. I was fragile to them. But my younger twin sisters got every ounce of their attention. When they turned 6, my parents began to train them to become ninjas. Eventually, I got fed up and met a strange guy who helped separate what little chakra I had left into ki and mana. Then we ran into Master Geralt and his apprentices who asked me if I would like the chance to join the Veil Magical Academy. I agreed and now here I am. Albedo frowned slightly. That was brief. Do you ever think about them? She asked. Your family, I mean. Yeah, he said softly. Part of me is proud of what I did. The other part of me wonders how they reacted when they found out I was gone. Then again, for the last 10 years, they had a habit of forgetting I was even there, so I'm not holding out much hope that they would realize I'm gone just yet. I know it may sound a bit sick, but I hope it hurts when they finally find out I've left. I love them, but to be ignored for the last 10 years? The only attention they showed me was when they found out Urza-chan and I had been becoming intimate and their solution was to fire Urza and try to keep her from me for the rest of our lives. Now they have to notice me and pay attention to me. Albedo smiled softly as she turned to the side and used her hand to gently caress his cheek. Of course they will notice you, Naruto-sama, she whispered gently into his ear. They will notice you when you rise up to your rightful position as ruler of this continent, she thought to herself. She could feel her heart beat wildly as she looked deeper into his azure eyes. You will be the most powerful mage and tamer the world will ever see. And when they see you, they will know just how much their negligence cost them and they will come to regret their decision to try and hold you back from your destiny. And even if they abandon you, I will always be by your side. No matter what you do or who you become. Naruto gave her a warm smile, causing her to blush a radiant crimson. You have no idea how much it means to me to hear you say that, Albedo-chan, he said before he gave her a quick peck on the lips. However, that peck quickly escalated into a passionate makeout session where Naruto was excitedly groping Albedo's exposed chest and Albedo was grinding against Naruto's raging, throbbing member with a mixture of lust and love burning in her heart. Naruto-sama, she moaned as she felt the heat in her nether regions burn even hotter. We should not do such things here. Let's retire to our room so we can do things properly and privately. Naruto smirked. My dear Albedo-chan, he whispered teasingly into her ear. Are you afraid someone will walk in on us and see us in such a state? No, Naruto-sama, she said as she continued to grind against him, hoping to bury the heat for even a moment longer. However, no other human has a right to see my body save for you. My body, my heart, and my soul belong to you. You know, I may take up a girlfriend, Naruto said solemnly. A human one. With the number of humans who are capable of bearing children being so small, I may not have much choice. It was true. Even in Konoha, there were so few women who could even have children that those who were able to were quickly married into prominent clans to help continue their bloodline. His mother had been one such human, but she willingly fell in love and married their father before he became Hokage. People with pure blood. Those who had such little Pokegirl ancestry, if any, were a commodity and were hastily placed in arranged marriages against their wills. Naruto had a small level of doubt that if he had stayed in Konoha, that is what would have happened to him. I understand, Naruto-sama, she replied with a glow. But that is neither here nor now. For tonight, you have me to keep you satisfied. So please, treat me as your true wife, if only for tonight. All right, he replied, causing her cheeks to burn. Tonight, you will be the only woman in my bed and in my mind. Tomorrow begins your punishments. 3 punishments a day for the next 5 days. Do you think you can handle it, Albedo-chan? For you, I would do anything, she said passionately. Naruto stepped out of the water, rinsed off with Albedo, then proceeded to bring her up to the taming room that Joy had been so gracious to allow him to stay in until they left for their journey again. When they entered the taming room, the door shut behind them and only the barely audible sounds of their love-making resonating through the soundproof room. End line. For the last 2 days, Urza had been enjoying watching Naruto punish Albedo. Unlike what Albedo had initially thought about his punishments being more ally sadistic, it turned out to be an increase in the difficulty of her training. When she and Urza were told to do X amount of push-ups, Naruto added on more push-ups while sitting on her back. When they ran a gauntlet through the forest, Urza would pelt her with stones, forcing her to dodge or take the blows. The only thing Albedo took solace in was that Naruto would tame her like there was no tomorrow after the last punishment of the day. Urza, on the other hand, had been spending much of her time improving her own training. When Naruto added exercises onto Albedo's training, she would push herself to do just as much. When she ran the gauntlet, she did her best to finish it in a faster time than the last time. She also spent her time reading a few books, mostly to learn how to understand tactics and strategy so that she could work better with her future harem sisters and her young master. To the young ingenue, she placed Naruto's well-being above her own, and if growing stronger was the best way to do so, she would gladly throw herself into the most grueling training regimen ever devised to become strong enough to keep him safe. Even when the rain cleared up and the group was now bound to Dreyfus Town, she refused to relent in her training. Albedo seemed to catch on as well, since whenever she saw Urza training just as hard as she did, she would push herself even further as well. It took them 5 days after leaving Bang Town to get to Dreyfus Town. And for those 5 days, Naruto, Urza, and Albedo had been busy between training themselves to exhaustion and the rare taming, for which the trio of mages would excuse themselves under the guise of going to get more firewood to give the 3 their privacy. Especially Alexander. He had actually gone to get firewood to stoke the fire with one day. As he came back, he saw Naruto in the middle of taming Albedo. When she spotted him, her fear aura turned on full blast as a dark power radiated across her hands as she threatened to castrate him if he did not avert his eyes. Needless to say, Alexander had learned all too quickly to leave for an hour, if not longer, when Geralt and Marcus had said they were going to get firewood. Albedo had found it absolutely exhilarating and orgasmic after devouring the raw, primal fear Alexander exuded whenever he so much as glanced at her that the taming lasted for another hour. By the end of it, Naruto and Albedo had been sore, and Naruto had given the young apprentice a glare that would have killed lesser men. Naruto forgave the mage since it wasn't intentional that he stumbled across the two, making love, as both Naruto and Urza had come to call it. Albedo was not one to complain for the label since it meant he genuinely loved her and that it was more than a part of keeping her sane for him, much like it was considered by many tamers. As they passed through the front gate, having been cleared by the Genii on duty, the group heard a strange ringing sound resonating from one of their group. Geralt pulled out a small pad-like device with a screen that was glowing with a strange green symbol in a darker green circle. Geralt smiled brightly before pressing his finger to the screen. "Hello, headmistress," he said proudly. "Good morning, Master Geralt," came a rough, yet beautiful feminine voice. "I take it your journey with our new recruit has gone well?" Aside from a complication from the storm that kept us from getting to Dreyfus Town earlier, I honestly would say that things have been coming along far better than we expected, Geralt replied. Young Naruto already has 2 Pokegirls under his belt. One was with him since we found him in Konoha. The other had been come across just prior to the storm that held us back for just over a week. Both of them respect him greatly and he has been training himself alongside them. "That's good to hear," she said with a sigh of relief. "I've actually called with some good news." "What is it?" Geralt asked curiously. The good news is that I'm in Dreyfus Town right now, she said excitedly. I've been meaning to explore the hidden continent on my own for quite some time, and now that I have a few weeks off, I decided to go there for a visit and to meet young Naruto myself. Geralt, Marcus, and Alexander's eyes widened to almost comical proportions. "Bu but headmistress," Geralt said with a quiver in his voice. "What about the academy? Won't they need you there?" She laughed over the line. "Of course not," she said simply. "And even if they did need me, Sona should be more than enough to keep everything under control." "Your assistant?" Geralt asked. "Yes," Jessica replied. "She has been asking for more responsibilities, and running the academy should be more than a big enough test to see if she's ready for more responsibility. After all, she is a member of the Citri family, some of the most prestigious mages to attend the academy. I have faith that she will surpass all expectations." Geralt winced. Sona Citri was indeed a talented mage. Just like her older sister, Seraphal, her mother, grandmother, and so on through many generations. They were all incredibly intelligent and had a particular affinity to water magic, though Seraphal had also had an incredibly powerful ice magic in addition to her water magic. "Well, if you are sure she can handle it, I suppose we can meet with you here." "Where are you staying?" "I'm staying at the Prancing Rapitor Inn," she replied. The group turned to the side and saw that very same inn standing right beside them. Geralt's sweat dropped when he saw the headmistress dressed in what could only be described as the most revealing outfit she owned. She wore a purple and gold, low-cut blouse that tied off to a brace-like necklace. In the middle of this blouse was a laced open part that shows her skin. It had a miniskirt attached to the blouse, but most of her legs were covered by white, decorated with purple and gold tights. She wears long, white gloves with a similar decoration than her tights and has decorative wings on her back. Naruto, however, was taking in the entire image as she spun around just in time to see them, giving them all a smile and a wave before hanging up. She had long red hair done into pigtails with a few bangs framing her face. Her soft brown doe-like eyes showed an intense passion for life and a great amount of wisdom and strength. She walked over to them and started to look around. "So where is he?" she asked, causing Naruto's head to fall. "Ever since you told me about his potential, I've been looking forward to meeting him." Headmistress, Alexander started nervously, causing her to turn her attention toward him. He pointed toward Naruto. "That's Naruto." "Oh," she said, understandably shocked. "The way you were talking about him, I was expecting him to be taller." An aura of depression surrounded Naruto, who began to mope in the fetal position against the wall of the inn. "Youthful vigor sucks," he moaned while Albedo and Urza rubbed his back in support. They knew how sensitive he was after discovering he couldn't get any taller or look any older than he currently did. While this may seem like a bad thing, it did turn on Urza since it meant that she could fulfill her Shotokan fetish, and Albedo knew that Naruto had the potential to be a powerful ruler in spite of his unintimidating stature, and like many infernals, she was attracted to powerful individuals. His stature simply meant that his foes would underestimate him, and that would prove to be their downfall. "Ah," she said before approaching Naruto. "I'm sorry." "Don't worry," Urza said with a brilliant smile. When someone else mentions his height, he gets depressed for a moment, but usually snaps out of it. It's kind of a sore spot for him. According to the nurse who gave him his blood test, usually those with youthful vigor blood gifts stop aging after they turn 18. But his gift awakened early, and they were 100% certain that he wouldn't physically age past 10 years old. It's going to take some time for him to get over it, but he'll eventually stop thinking about it so much. "I understand," she replied before turning to Geralt. "So what should we do next, Master Geralt? I wanted to see how different the local food is compared to the other leagues." "Well," Marcus said in thought, "Konoha was full of really amazing restaurants. I'm sure we'll find some here too." "Actually," Naruto said, "why don't we have Urza-chan cook for us? If you guys have enough money, we can go shopping in the local market and she can cook us a hearty Konoha meal." Urza smiled. "That's a great idea," she said in response. "I'd love to give you all a taste of a great home-cooked meal instead of going to a restaurant for once." "Are you sure it isn't a problem?" Jessica asked the ingenue. "We wouldn't want to impose." "Not at all," Urza responded in kind. "In fact, it's been a while since I actually cooked my young master a proper meal. Just before we left Konoha, if my memory is correct." Naruto nodded in agreement. It was one of the things I genuinely loved doing for him, even as a bunny girl. Well, Geralt said, if you're sure, why don't you make us a list of things we need to buy from the store and we'll go get it? Urza nodded, pulling out a small black booklet from somewhere. They would have said she hid it in her bra, but it was well known that Urza refused to wear a bra. She flipped through several pages before handing the book to Geralt, open to a specific page. Looking over the meal and the ingredients it required, he realized that everything should be relatively inexpensive, but the preparations were lengthy and meticulous. He split the list between his two apprentices before they headed into the market, leaving Albedo, Urza, Naruto, and headmistress Jessica Albert to their own devices. So, Jessica started out, drawing out the word as she searched for something to say. You used to live in Konoha, huh? What's it like there? Naruto sighed in reluctance. About the same as any other village of ninja, I suppose, Naruto said flatly. People are nice up front, but you can never really tell what kind of person they're unless you're a good judge of character. Even though it's called the strongest village, that's only because their ninja forces use some of the best teamwork compared to other villages. It's usually every kid's dream to become a ninja, a tamer, or even a ninja tamer in service of the village. And what about you? She asked. Were you one of those children? I was. Until I discovered that my chakra coils, the vessels through which we channeled chakra to perform our techniques, were barely functional and I had barely enough chakra to live, he said, trying to hide the spite in his voice. I ended up running into a strange old man who said he could help me with my dream of becoming strong. I suppose. I was a bit desperate and should have looked into his claim further, but I wanted to be able to prove my strength so bad that I just accepted. However, what he said he did was thought to be impossible. He actually separated my chakra into its base energies, mana and ki. He pointed me in Geralt's direction, and that's where this little adventure of mine kicked off. I see, she replied. Sure, she knew that mana and ki were the base energies that created the energy known as chakra in the hidden continent, but she never knew someone had found a way to separate them and give that individual the chance to become a mage. And judging by Naruto's mana, he had quite a bit of mana to spare. If he had learned magic, she had no doubts that he would be able to cast high-rank spells like there was no tomorrow, but he didn't have much control over it according to Geralt's report. It was actually to be expected that a shinobi would have a decent level of control of any mana they had, since chakra was partially comprised of it. But with Naruto never being trained or being incapable of using chakra, he was never able to gain the slightest level of control. But that didn't bother her. Many mages learned how to control their mana at the academy, if they were allowed in. For Geralt to speak so highly of the potential of a young boy, his potential must have been great. The last mages that came from the hidden continent had been Tobirama Senju, who was one of the few master necromancers of his time and went on to become the second Hokage, and Kurenai Yuhi, who was a Jonin with an incredible affinity for illusion magic. Because of these two, she would send a group to investigate for any signs of mages or those with the potential to become mages to join the academy. And now, it seemed, they had stumbled across an individual with more potential than the other two combined. She only needed to know one thing. What will you do? She asked. Once you learn how to use magic, what are your plans for the future? Naruto paused and scratched his chin. Well, I guess I'll wander around the other leagues. Might take on the gyms since they sound interesting. Maybe do a few jobs here and there. Make it one big adventure. After that, I don't know yet. I guess I'll just follow my heart and see where that takes me. Jessica smiled. He sounded so much like her late husband. All right, she said happily. I guess when we get to the academy, I'll assign you a dorm room. You have a good heart and I don't think you'd become a dark mage. As long as you keep up on your studies, you can study at the academy beginning next year. Naruto's eyes were wide in shock. My husband was a good judge of character and I like to think that he passed down some of that ability to me. If he were here, I have no doubt that he would have let you join. Naruto seemed to wrap his arms around her, his head landing square in between her generous bosom. Thank you, he said, his words muffled by her clothing and her S, but she understood and hugged him back. Naruto hopped off of her, his cheeks pink in embarrassment, while Jessica was squealing about how cute he looked when he was embarrassed. When everyone had returned, Geralt was smiling, knowing based on how Naruto and Jessica were becoming familiar to one another that he was going to be allowed to stay. That afternoon, Urza had taken all of the ingredients that the trio had gathered and started to cook up a feast. After it was set out, almost everyone had begun to devour the meal as if they hadn't eaten in ages. Even Albedo, who was reluctant to even eat it until her stomach growled and Naruto insisted she try some, was digging in with reckless abandon after the food touched her lips. They soon realized why Naruto had Urza cook. She was incredibly talented in the kitchen. When the meal was finished and their appetites had been sated with even just a sample of Konoha-style cooking, Naruto excused themselves to get some more training in. Headmistress Jessica said that tomorrow morning, she would bring them to Vale Magical Academy using an enchanted item that had a teleportation spell of some kind bound to it with its target location being the academy, so he had plenty of time to train both himself and his Pokegirls. So that is how he ended up doing pull-ups on a tree branch while Urza did push-ups and Albedo did sit-ups just outside of the town walls. Naruto hated that his body wouldn't develop into his teens, but he decided that, in spite of that, he would still strengthen his body. His ki already naturally reinforced his body, improving many of his physical attributes already. However, that was not by much, and if he wanted to become stronger, he'd need to learn how to focus on using his ki to further strengthen his body. Make it more durable, more powerful, more agile, more than a ninja would typically be able to do with chakra. Once he felt he was on par with a genin ninja, he would continue to improve and develop until he became as strong as a chunin. Then a jonin. And finally until he was capable of standing on par, if not surpassing, a Kage of any of the 5 great villages. It did not go unnoticed that his stamina was slowly building up faster than his other physical attributes. He attributed this to how often he made love to his Pokegirls. With each time it happened, his stamina would grow. Not by a noticeable degree, but it was there and he had felt himself going a few more seconds than he had the last time many times since that old man had granted him this power. Those seconds turned into minutes and now, he could last into the 30-minute mark, give or take a minute or two, where he used to last 10 to 15 minutes tops if he really pushed himself back then. As he contemplated on whether his parents and sisters had discovered his departure yet, he also found himself worried. Was he worried they would send someone to bring him back? Partially. He had no intentions of going back, and if they did somehow manage to bring him back, he would simply run away again. However, his worry largely was aimed at Mito. Unlike Naruto or his parents, she did notice him. Every time she was called away, he knew, whether he saw her do so or not, that she would always check to see if he was all right. He was worried for her. She was his sister, so she would no doubt become incredibly strong given time. But he didn't want her to get stronger for him. He wanted her to find a reason other than him to become strong. He hoped she would find her reason like he had, though hopefully without the heartache that made him realize his reason sooner than he would have preferred. Naruto dismounted his branch while Urza and Albedo had changed exercises with one another. Naruto took the moment to sit on Albedo's back as she did push-ups. This time, it wasn't as a punishment since she had gotten used to him doing it. It had become something he did when they were exercising to take a small break and think about anything he had on his mind. Yasaka had occasionally taken on the role of an advisor, giving him useful tips on what he and his Pokegirls should work on. With her experience, Naruto considered it foolish to dismiss her ideas and suggestions without taking possible consequences into consideration. Sadly, since she never had ki, she couldn't instruct him on how to use it to improve himself. However, she had given him a strict workout schedule to follow, which he has been doing since she suggested it. While he couldn't feel or see the results right now, she said that as he got older, he would be able to notice the results when the time was right. Naruto began to meditate on his moving Pokegirl's back, allowing the world around him to fade and his mindscape to appear. He walked through the house until he finally came across Yasaka, who was laid out upon a king-size bed with crimson sheets, naked as the day she was born. When Naruto asked why she insisted on being naked whenever they met, she replied that, while she could wear clothes from his mindscape, only he would ever see her since his mind was protected from invasion and manipulations thanks to a few of his blood gifts. Naruto suspected it was because she knew how beautiful she was and wanted to tease him with it. "Yasaka-san," Naruto said with a brief nod. "Mo," she whined with a cute pout on her lips. "How many times do I have to ask you to call me Yasaka-chan, Naruto-kun?" Naruto sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You said you wanted to tell me something before we got to VMA, Yasaka-chan?" Yasaka nodded before patting the spot beside her with a seductive smirk. When he was seated beside her, she draped her arms around his neck. Of course, she replied. I just wanted to warn you about something you will more than likely encounter there. The academy is likely situated on one of the main ley lines of the world, supplying it with more mana than most will ever have in their lifetimes. This makes it easy for mages to recover expended mana. However, this also had a few benefits and downsides. The benefits of such an arrangement are that you will recover mana easier and you will most likely develop some form of sensitivity to ley lines, being able to sense them when you get close to them or even be able to sense the mana in others. This can help you prepare against enemy mages in the future. The downsides are that those who have been there for long periods of time are also sensitive to mana and you will be like a massive beacon to them. And the problem with that is, Naruto asked. The problem, as you so kindly put it, is that with as much mana as you currently have, to those with even slightly sensitive to sensing mana, she said. Well, it's like a ninja who wears bright neon orange in the middle of a battlefield. Whether you want them to or not, it is almost guaranteed that everyone in the academy will know where you are at any point in time until you can get your mana under control. So, I'm going to be in for a huge headache, aren't I? He asked through half-lidded eyes. Pretty much, she replied nonchalantly. Naruto sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration. Fuck me, he muttered to himself. Well, if you insist, Yasaka purred in his ear. He could only hope that the headache from being a huge target in a school where most people could sense him would be relatively minor compared to the one he was expecting. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.